Chapter 521. Coming of Age 1. Cecilia exhaled sharply, her frustration mounting as yet another dress joined the growing pile on the floor. "It's not good enough," she muttered, her sulk deepening. Around her, the maids bustled, their faces a mix of nervousness and determination, trying to appease the princess. Today wasn't just any day. It was special in ways that made her heart race and her mind whirl. And for once, Cecilia, always so composed, felt a flicker of something foreign. Ba-dump, ba-dump. Her heartbeat thrummed like a persistent drum, an unwelcome reminder of her nerves. She tried to dismiss it, but the thought of Arthur kept slipping into her mind, derailing every attempt at calm. Finally, after what felt like hours, she settled on a dress. It was a stunning backless black gown that contrasted perfectly with her sunlit blonde hair and her fair, creamy skin. The ruby necklace she chose added a touch of bold elegance, its fiery hue catching the light and complementing the crimson of her eyes. Matching ruby earrings completed the look, framing her face with just the right balance of regality and allure. Cecilia turned to the mirror, her reflection staring back with a mix of confidence and anticipation. For all her fussing, she couldn't deny that the ensemble was perfect. And tonight had to be perfect. Ba-dump. After finishing her preparations, Cecilia stepped out of her room, her maids trailing dutifully behind her. She resisted the itch to check her phone, clasping her hands tightly as she made her way to meet her parents and older brother. Quinn Slatemark's expression darkened the moment he saw his daughter. His gaze swept over her gown, lingering on the daring design with visible disapproval. But before he could voice his thoughts, Adeline nudged him firmly, silencing any protest. He sighed, knowing exactly why Cecilia had chosen such an outfit. All because of that boy, Arthur. The mere thought of him soured Quinn's mood further. It wasn't just that Cecilia was utterly enamored. It was that the boy had somehow managed to entangle two other princesses in the same web. And, to top it all off, he was a nightingale. A nightingale. Quinn's jaw tightened, but he swallowed his words. He had endured enough lectures from Adeline about meddling in his daughter's affairs. She had made it clear, Cecilia's love life was hers to navigate, just as he had turned a blind eye to Valerian's. "You look every inch the young woman you've grown into, Cecilia," Adeline said warmly, her smile bright and genuine. Cecilia's eyes lit up at her mother's words, a small blush rising to her cheeks. Quinn, however, could only grumble inwardly, suppressing the urge to voice his misgivings. Instead, he folded his arms, silently watching his daughter, the picture of youthful elegance and determination, walk toward the life she was shaping for herself. The Slatemark imperial family made their way toward the grand hall, the very air around them steeped in regality. The towering doors swung open with a ceremonious creak, revealing the opulence within. As they entered, the speakers announced their arrival with a flourish, drawing every eye in the room. Quinn Slatemark came to a stop, his posture rigid, commanding the space as only an emperor could. His voice resonated across the hall, carrying the authority of a ruler but also the warmth of a father. "I would like to thank everyone for attending my daughter's coming-of-age ceremony. Please, enjoy the evening." Polite applause rippled through the crowd, but Quinn's attention was elsewhere. His sharp eyes swept over the familiar faces of dignitaries, nobles, and prodigies, scanning with purpose. They finally settled on the one person he sought, Arthur Nightingale. His gaze hardened, narrowing as he regarded the young man who had somehow ensnared the affection of not just his daughter but two other princesses. Quinn wanted to find fault. Any crack in the armor, any sign that the boy was unworthy of Cecilia. But it was proving to be a futile endeavor. Arthur stood as he always did, calm, poised, and exuding an air of quiet confidence. A young man who was both admired and feared, carrying the weight of his growing legend with startling ease. Try as he might, Quinn could not deny the truth. Arthur Nightingale was becoming a force in his own right. Reluctantly, Quinn allowed himself the faintest nod of approval, though it soured his mood further. The boy wasn't unworthy, but that didn't mean Quinn had to like him. Quinn took his seat on the gilded throne at the head of the room, his expression carefully composed, though his fingers tapped the armrest in irritation. Adeline slid into her chair beside him, casting him a knowing look. She said nothing, but her faint smirk spoke volumes. As the festivities began, Quinn leaned back slightly, observing the hall with the keen eye of both an emperor and a father. One thought lingered in his mind, sharper than any blade. This isn't over, Nightingale. While Quinn scrutinized Arthur from his seat, Arthur and Cecilia prepared to take the floor for the first dance of the evening. The orchestra shifted seamlessly into a new melody, one unmistakably romantic. Its gentle swells and lilting notes weaving an intimate atmosphere that set the mood for the couple. "An excellent choice, Princess," Arthur said with a subtle smirk as he knelt before her. His movements were fluid and precise, a mixture of decorum and charm that made the onlookers murmur with admiration. He touched her hand lightly and pressed a kiss to its back. "May I have the honor of this dance, Your Highness?" "You may," Cecilia replied, her smile bright and brimming with confidence. She placed her hand in his, and they stepped into position as the music swirled around them. Arthur's hand found its place at the small of her back, the soft fabric of her dress cool beneath his fingers. Or rather, what little of it there was. Her daring choice of a backless gown had not gone unnoticed. "So," Cecilia whispered as they moved in perfect synchrony, "how do you like the dress?" Arthur's pause was almost imperceptible, but the faint heat in his cheeks betrayed him. "It's nice," he admitted, his voice low and measured, though his expression spoke volumes more. Cecilia had always been bold, but something about her tonight seemed even more so, like a predator that had found the perfect moment to close in. Her confidence, mixed with Arthur's growing affection and the moments they'd shared in recent months, left her nearly irresistible. Arthur's eyes flicked downward, just for a moment, before returning to her face. Unfortunately for him, Cecilia noticed. Her smile curled into something self-assured and mischievous, a glimmer of triumph in her crimson eyes. "Well, you are a man and you are my man," she said with a wink, her voice a low purr. "So I don't mind if you look, just don't let my father catch you." Arthur couldn't suppress a chuckle at her audacity, shaking his head slightly. "You're impossible, you know that?" "I know," she said, her tone light but her gaze unwavering. "And you love it. But still, let's keep things in check for now," Cecilia teased, her crimson eyes glinting with mischief. "I'd hate for my father to string you up by your ankles in front of everyone. Can't have that, can we?" Arthur sighed dramatically, shaking his head. "Why did I have to fall for the daughters of the three most overprotective fathers in existence? Because I'm worth it?" Cecilia shot back without hesitation, her tone smug yet playful. "Don't you think so?" "Of course you are, Cece," Arthur said, his voice softening as he pulled her just a little closer. "At this point, it's impossible to imagine my life without you, my devil." Her cheeks flushed a delicate pink, and her smile widened until it seemed to light up the entire ballroom. "You're lucky we're in public," she whispered, her voice teasing but her eyes betraying the sincerity beneath. "I'm this close to kissing you, Nightingale. So, before I cause a scandal, let's create some distance, shall we?" Arthur nodded, a wry grin tugging at his lips as the final strains of the song faded into silence. They moved apart gracefully, still maintaining the perfect poise expected of them. "You won't need to create distance later," Cecilia murmured under her breath, just loud enough for Arthur to hear. Her words carried a promise that left him momentarily stunned as they turned to bow to each other in perfect unison. The applause was polite and measured, but to Arthur, it was as though the world had narrowed to just the two of them. Chapter 522. Coming of Age 2. After my dance with Cecilia, I shared the floor with Serafina, Rachel, and Rose in that order. Cecilia chose to remain at the edge of the hall, content to watch rather than take another turn or dance with anyone else. Her gaze never left me, a quiet sort of possessiveness radiating from her as she sipped from a delicate glass. Serafina, as always, was different. where Rachel and Cecilia exuded boldness, or to be frank, a relentless flirtatious energy that bordered on insatiable, Serafina was quieter, her demeanor less fiery but no less compelling. It wasn't that she didn't enjoy our more intimate moments. She did, but she approached them with a sense of grace and restraint that contrasted starkly with the other two. Her crystalline blue eyes met mine, steady and calm. The shadow of her brother's son no longer loomed over her, and the difference was palpable. Where there had once been an undercurrent of tension, there was now serenity, a confidence that had been absent before. "It will be hard," Serafina said at last, breaking the silence as we swayed to the soft rhythm of the music. "What will be hard?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. After my birthday," she said, her voice measured but tinged with something I couldn't quite place. I blinked in surprise. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then lowered her voice, leaning in just enough for her words to be meant for me alone. "You'll need to talk to my uncle. Convince him to distract my father." I nearly tripped over my own feet. Talk to her uncle? About that? Surely she couldn't be serious. Her uncle was my master, but he loved his niece as much as her father did. The idea was absurd enough to make me choke on a laugh that I quickly swallowed. "Why can't you talk to him yourself?" I asked, barely masking my incredulity. Serafina blinked, her cheeks turning a faint, rare shade of pink. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she admitted, "I'm shy." For a moment I was stunned. Serafina Zenith, calm and collected. Shy? The absurdity of the situation was almost too much. I couldn't help the smile that crept onto my face as I shook my head. "All right," I said, managing to keep my tone neutral despite the storm of thoughts in my head. "I'll see what I can do." The softest of smiles graced her lips, and I realized I'd do far more than just talk to her uncle if it meant seeing her like this. "I missed having you to myself, Arthur," Serafina whispered, her voice soft yet resolute as we moved in rhythm across the floor. Her crystalline blue eyes held a rare vulnerability, a quiet plea she didn't often voice. "Come back to the East and I'll treat you well." I hesitated for a moment, giving her the honest answer she deserved. "I'll see about it after scaling the wall, Sarah." She pouted, her expression both endearing and stubborn, before nodding with a reluctant sigh. "All right, then scale it fast." "Anything for you," I replied with a small, reassuring smile. The song drew to a close, and I let go of her hand with a light bow. Next, I turned to Rachel Creighton, the future saintess, or so they called her already, thanks to her tireless efforts against the Shadow Seekers in the north and her critical role in the reclamation of Warian. She approached me with a radiant smile, her energy infectious as she all but skipped into my arms. "Arthur," she sang, her voice playful and warm as we began our dance. I raised an eyebrow, catching a slight shift in her demeanor. "Did the saintess indulge in underage drinking?" I asked, my tone dry but laced with amusement. Rachel giggled, the sound light and unguarded. "Hee, no," she replied with an exaggerated shake of her head, her golden locks bouncing. "I just like you so much, you know." I couldn't help but smile, her sheer enthusiasm disarming. Rachel had a way of making even the simplest moments feel grand, her zest for life a constant force that lifted those around her. As we twirled to the music, I felt the weight of her affection, a warmth that was as humbling as it was undeniable. "Honestly, I'm a bit sad I have to give you up to Cecilia for today," Rachel said, her tone light but carrying a hint of genuine disappointment. "But I'll manage, since you're definitely not escaping during my birthday." I raised an eyebrow at her confidence. "What about your father and sister?" I asked, thinking of Alastair Creighton. He and I were on good terms, but I doubted he'd be thrilled about me being involved with Rachel, especially considering her past. Rachel's expression turned resolute. "I'll deal with them," she said firmly, her sapphire eyes glinting with determination. "They're not going to keep you from me." I shook my head, half in amusement and half in disbelief. "At this point, they should revise the epithet you'll earn when you reach ascendant rank." She shot me a pointed look. Well, that's your fault, she said, her tone accusing but playful. How exactly is this my fault? I asked, genuinely curious. Her expression turned thoughtful, almost earnest, and it caught me off guard. All boys like the innocent girl in public but a bad girl in private, don't they? She asked, tilting her head slightly as if pondering some universal truth. And, well, you brought that out of me because you're such a eunuch sometimes. At this rate, even Serafina might start doing the same. I blinked, completely thrown off by her unexpected candor. I don't even know how to respond to that, I admitted. Rachel just laughed, the sound warm and carefree, as if she'd won some unspoken battle, and perhaps she had. Maybe let go of your inhibitions sometimes, she murmured, her voice as soft as a breeze. You'll find out during your birthday what happens when I do, I replied in a low voice, meeting her gaze. Rachel's cheeks flushed a deep crimson, but the mischievous glint in her eyes was unmistakable as she broke into another bright smile. The dance ended with a slight bow from both of us, though her expression lingered in my mind. Finally, I approached Rose Springshaper, who had been waiting with characteristic patience at the edge of the dance floor. My turn at last, she said with a gentle smile, offering her hand with the refined grace that had been drilled into her since childhood. As we began to move together, I was struck by how naturally we fell into sync. Rose's movements were fluid, practiced, each step a testament to years of formal training. But beneath the technical perfection, there was something more personal, a warmth that she reserved only for moments like these. You know, she said quietly, her voice carrying just a hint of her usual teasing tone. Watching you dance with the others was quite educational. Educational how? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Each of them brings out a different side of you, she observed, her brown eyes studying my face with the analytical precision she usually reserved for her alchemical work. With Serafina, you're gentle, almost protective. With Rachel, you match her energy but temper her wildness. With Cecilia, she paused, a small smile playing at her lips. With Cecilia, you look like you're constantly trying to stay one step ahead of whatever she's planning. And with you, I asked, genuinely curious about her assessment. Rose's smile softened, becoming something more intimate than her usual composed expression. With me, you relax, like you don't have to be anyone other than yourself. The observation caught me off guard with its accuracy. There was something about Rose's presence that had always felt safe, not in the sense of being less passionate or intense than the others, but in the way that allowed me to simply exist without constantly navigating complex emotional currents. I've been thinking about what you said, she continued, her voice dropping to a whisper meant only for my ears, about not letting fear hold me back. And I've decided you're right. Her grip on my hand tightened slightly, a gesture of resolve. I want to be part of this, of us, completely, not holding back, not second-guessing every feeling. I spun her gently, drawing her back close as the music swelled around us. Rose, I know it's complicated, she said quickly, anticipating my concerns. I know there are 4 of us, and that's not exactly conventional. But when have any of us ever been conventional? She had a point, looking around at the other 3, each remarkable in their own way, each bringing something unique to whatever this arrangement was becoming. Conventional seemed like the last word anyone would use to describe our situation. As our dance concluded and I bowed to her with the same courtesy I'd shown the others, I couldn't help but marvel at how different yet complementary they all were. Each dance had been a reminder of why I'd fallen for them in the first place, and why the thought of choosing between them felt impossible. After the dances, I found myself mingling with Serafina, Rachel, Rose, and Cecilia, the 4 of them chatting and laughing while I did my best to remain inconspicuous. Well, as inconspicuous as one could be while avoiding the laser-focused gaze of Quinn Slatemark and trying not to think about the various parental figures who were undoubtedly taking note of tonight's proceedings. The sight of Rose fitting so naturally into the group dynamic, her gentle humor balancing Rachel's exuberance and tempering some of Cecilia's more outrageous comments, felt right in a way that was both surprising and inevitable. Ignoring the gaze of a radiant rancor was about as effective as hiding in plain sight, but it gave me the illusion of control over the situation. I chose to cling to that. As the banquet slowly wound down, the hum of conversation dulled, and the atmosphere grew more subdued. Guests began departing in small groups, the grand hall emptying in measured waves. "Come with me?" Cecilia whispered, her fingers lacing through mine before I could even register her words. Her touch was warm and firm, leaving no room for hesitation. I glanced briefly at Rachel, Serafina, and Rose, giving them a parting wave that earned me knowing looks from all three, before Cecilia gently tugged me along. As we slipped past the dwindling crowd, she leaned closer. "Hide us with your manna," she whispered, her voice almost inaudible. I frowned slightly. "Your father will notice," I warned. The idea of cloaking ourselves was appealing, but I knew the limits of my current abilities. A radiant ranker like Quinn would see through it in an instant. "Just worry about hiding us from ascendant rankers and below," she replied, her tone filled with unshakable confidence. I hesitated for a moment but nodded, weaving a subtle veil of manna around us. It wouldn't fool the likes of Quinn, but it would be enough to evade lesser eyes. As the veil settled into place, Cecilia's crimson eyes sparkled with delight. She squeezed my hand and whispered, "Trust me, tonight we'll only have to deal with each other." Chapter 525. Coming of Age 5. The morning light filtered through the curtains when I stirred, though calling it morning felt generous given what my phone displayed when I reached for it with sluggish fingers. The glowing screen greeted me with the time, 1 p.m. I stared at the numbers, momentarily disoriented. I couldn't remember the last time I'd slept this long, if ever. My body had been attuned to 6 hours of rest since my early training days, no more, no less. It was a discipline that had served me well through countless challenges. But apparently Cecilia had managed to exhaust even my enhanced constitution. "Did we really fall asleep at 7? I muttered, running a hand through my disheveled hair as fragments of the previous night drifted back through my consciousness. Beside me, Cecilia stirred like a contented cat, her golden locks splayed across the silk pillow like rays of captured sunlight. Her arms instinctively wrapped around my waist as she nestled closer, a serene expression softening features that were usually animated with mischief or determination. Even in sleep, she seemed to radiate that particular confidence that made her so captivating. I smiled despite myself, unable to help the warmth that spread through my chest at the sight. She looked so peaceful, so different from the teasing, boldly provocative woman she had been throughout the night. There was something almost vulnerable about her like this, though I suspected she'd hex me if I ever described her that way while she was awake. Gently, I ran the back of my fingers along her cheek, marveling at the softness of her skin and the way she unconsciously leaned into the touch. Her crimson eyes fluttered open at the contact, and a sleepy but thoroughly satisfied grin spread across her lips. "Arthur?" she murmured, her voice still thick with drowsiness as she caught my hand. To my surprise, though perhaps I should have expected it by now, she brought one of my fingers to her lips and gave it a deliberately provocative lick, her eyes never leaving mine. I chuckled, shaking my head at her incorrigible nature. "Good morning to you two. Are you not tired? Mentally? Not at all." She stretched languidly, every movement deliberate and graceful despite what we'd put each other through. "Physically." She paused, testing her range of motion with a theatrical wince before smirking at me with unmistakable satisfaction. "Let's just say you definitely did your job. I genuinely can't walk properly, and I have the distinct feeling I won't be able to for the rest of the day." Her words made me laugh, a sound mixed with pride and slight concern. I leaned down to kiss her forehead, tasting the faint salt of dried sweat. "Good," I whispered, though part of me wondered if I should feel guilty about her condition. "Though I have to say," Cecilia continued, propping herself up on one elbow to study my face with those penetrating crimson eyes, "your stamina is absolutely ridiculous, like unnaturally so. Are you sure you're entirely human?"
Ceci.
"Don't CC me," she interrupted, though her tone was playful rather than accusatory. "I'm not complaining, quite the opposite, actually. I'm just saying that if this is what you're like right now, I'm genuinely curious what you'll be capable of in the future. The other girls might need to start taking turns just to survive. How about you join me and my family for lunch? Cecilia asked as she began to move more purposefully, stretching her arms above her head with an elegance that somehow made even her winces look graceful. What? I blinked, the sudden topic change catching me off guard. Come on now, she said, fixing me with that look that brooked no argument. My father already knows something's up. This isn't some fleeting dalliance we can pretend never happened. Is it? The weight of her words settled over me like a lead blanket. She was right, of course. We'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, entered territory that had permanent consequences. I don't think this is the best timing, Cece. She narrowed her eyes, the expression transforming her from satisfied lover to imperial princess in an instant. Arthur, you can't avoid my father forever. Now that we've taken this step, you're going to marry me eventually. That means dealing with him as your future father-in-law. Or were you planning to run away from this responsibility? The casual way she mentioned marriage sent my pulse racing for entirely different reasons than our earlier activities. You know I love you, Cece. Her expression immediately softened into a victorious smile that reminded me exactly why she was so dangerous. Good. Then get dressed, and help me with mine while you're at it. I'm going to need assistance with some of the more intricate fastenings. I raised an eyebrow. Can't you just use manna to dress yourself? She rolled her eyes dramatically, her lips forming that particular pout that made her look younger and more vulnerable than her usual commanding presence. Manna's not exactly helpful when it comes to untangling the aftermath of activities like ours. And let's be honest, we couldn't exactly have done what we did using mana manipulation. Could we? Some things require a more hands-on approach. Her words hung in the air with typical Cecilia boldness, matter-of-fact yet laced with the kind of intimate knowledge that made my thoughts scatter in several directions at once. I shook my head with a laugh, already resigned to whatever chaos she had planned for the day. Besides, she continued, standing carefully and testing her balance, I rather like the idea of you helping me dress. Feels appropriately domestic, like we're already married. Don't get ahead of yourself, I said, though I was already moving to assist her. Oh, I'm not getting ahead of anything, she replied with serene confidence. I'm simply acknowledging the inevitable. By the way, you can stare as much as you want now. You're the one man who's allowed to. I groaned, shaking my head at her shameless boldness. You shouldn't tease me when you're so sore, Cece. That's not exactly fair play. She rolled her eyes in dramatic exasperation. Oh, and as if you didn't spend months teasing me nonstop, only to make this ridiculous rule of waiting until we're adults? Deal with it, you hypocritical son. Consider this my revenge for all the times you let me down and left me wanting you. I sighed, recognizing the truth in her accusation. Fair enough, I muttered, moving to help her with the complex lacings of her undergarments. The process was intimate in a different way than our earlier passion. Careful, tender, requiring communication and trust as I helped her into garments designed more for appearance than practicality. Between her pointed observations about my technique and the occasional soft sound of discomfort she tried to hide, we managed to get her into a sleek, elegant outfit that perfectly balanced her natural confidence with a subtle softness appropriate for a family lunch. We clean up nicely, I said once I dressed myself, examining our reflection in the full-length mirror that dominated one wall of her chambers. Cecilia nodded approvingly, adjusting the ruby necklace that served as the final touch to her polished appearance. No one would guess what we spent the night doing, though of course, I wouldn't mind the world knowing about us. Let's keep that between us for now, I replied, trying not to think about how her father had probably already drawn his own conclusions. First time meeting your girlfriend's father? Cecilia asked, her tone carrying that playful edge that usually preceded trouble. Technically, I'd navigated similar situations in my previous life, but this was indeed uncharted territory in my current existence. Not just that, I replied, rubbing the back of my neck. Your father happens to be the emperor of the most powerful nation on the continent, and let's say I've crossed several significant boundaries with the daughter he treasures above all else. Cecilia smirked, patting me on the back with mock sympathy that did nothing to ease my growing anxiety. Well, congratulations, Arthur. You've really outdone yourself this time. And guess what? There's absolutely no escaping this now. You're committed, whether you're ready or not. I sighed, already dreading the impending encounter with a man who could order my execution with a casual gesture. She, however, seemed completely unbothered by the prospect, casually pulling out her phone to summon her personal maids for final preparations. Watching her calm confidence in the face of what felt like impending doom, I couldn't help but wonder if she was enjoying my discomfort far too much. Then again, knowing Cecilia, that was probably exactly the point. Chapter 526. Lunch with the Emperor 1. To say Quinn's mood was foul would be an understatement of epic proportions. He was livid. The morning after Cecilia's birthday banquet, his wife, Adeline, had approached him with an unusual amount of affection. Quinn, ever the dutiful husband, assumed she was simply in a good mood and had happily taken advantage of the rare moment of tenderness. It wasn't until he reactivated his mana that the truth hit him like a war hammer. Quinn had deactivated his mana for the night, a habit born of ensuring a peaceful rest, undisturbed by the overwhelming flow of information his heightened senses provided. Only imminent danger would have pierced the veil of calm he allowed himself. So when he reactivated his senses that morning, the first thing he registered was Arthur Nightingale's presence far too close to his daughter for comfort, specifically in her room. The realization almost sent him storming down the halls in a fury. Sure, teenage girls fooling around with boys was common enough these days, practically a given in the modern age. The average age for such things was 16, after all, the same as the legal age of consent in the Slatemark Empire. But to think Cecilia had dared to bring him into her room, in his palace. Well, technically, it was her palace, one of several within the larger imperial palace complex, but that was semantics. As emperor, all the palaces ultimately belonged to Quinn. And therein lay the problem. It wasn't just that his daughter had crossed a line. It was that she'd done so right under his nose. What really stoked the flames of his ire, however, was Adeline's refusal to back him up. With the calm logic that so often infuriated him, she pointed out that he'd never batted an eye at the string of young women Valerian had quietly smuggled into the palace over the years. Quinn scowled at the memory of her words, his anger simmering but not boiling over. For now, lunch was about to become an entirely different battleground when Cecilia swept into the room, her arm entwined with Arthur's as though any distance between them was an intolerable offense. Her radiant smile didn't help matters. It only made Quinn's jaw tighten further. Quinn glared at Arthur with the intensity of a storm on the horizon, his patience hanging by a thread. The sheer audacity of the boy was, if nothing else, impressive. Quinn had made his disapproval abundantly clear, or so he thought. In his mind, the subtle yet unmistakable displays of distaste should have been more than enough to keep Arthur at arm's length. And yet, here he was, not just brazenly courting Cecilia but practically flaunting their closeness under Quinn's very nose. I know boys his age tend to think with what's under their belt, but this is something else entirely, Quinn thought darkly. Most would have been paralyzed with fear at the prospect of facing an emperor's wrath, especially when their family was based in the Slatemark Empire. The fact that Arthur was seemingly oblivious to or outright dismissive of the risks only added fuel to Quinn's simmering frustration. The Nightingales were untouchable for reasons Arthur himself likely didn't fully understand yet, but that only made the young man's boldness more bewildering. And now, rather than retreating to safety, Arthur had decided to sit down for lunch with the imperial family, as though he belonged there. Even Valerian, who rarely reacted to anything, raised an eyebrow, and Adeline watched Arthur with a mixture of curiosity and something that might have been approval, which only made Quinn's mood darker. This was shaping up to be quite the meal. Quinn sat in silent anticipation, waiting for Arthur to greet the family properly. As Arthur prepared to speak, Cecilia tightened her grip on his arm, her subtle warning evident. A flicker of hesitation crossed Arthur's face before he squared his shoulders and parted his lips. "Thank you for inviting me to lunch, mother, father, brother," he said with a calm confidence that belied the gravity of his words. Adeline stifled a laugh, the sheer audacity of Arthur's address catching her off guard despite everything she'd witnessed from him before. Her quiet giggle broke through the tension, while Quinn simply stared, momentarily rendered speechless. Father. Quinn's thoughts stumbled over the word like a misstep on a staircase. Did he just call me father? He blinked, his mind struggling to process the young man's boldness. Before Quinn could form a response, Cecilia and Arthur took their seats, side by side, as if nothing unusual had transpired. Arthur's calm demeanor only deepened Quinn's bewilderment, leaving the Emperor in stunned silence as the rest of the family exchanged amused glances. Quinn found himself at a loss for words, watching as Arthur calmly ate lunch, completely unbothered by the tension in the room. It was as if the young man hadn't just addressed the Emperor of the Slatemark Empire as father without so much as a second thought. Quinn? Adeline leaned over, her voice low and teasing. We were never this bold, were we? Quinn nodded absently, still processing the situation. Adeline and he had been a love match, not a political arrangement. She had been the woman who shattered the icy walls around his heart, earning his fiercely possessive devotion and instantly sidelining any arranged marriage proposals, despite her not meeting the traditional expectations of an empress. Yes, they had their fair share of youthful recklessness, but Quinn couldn't recall ever doing something as audacious as this. Even at his most love-struck, he had never strolled into Adeline's family home after spending the night with her, sat down for a meal, and addressed her father as father. That title only came after the wedding, and even then with some awkwardness. Yet here was Arthur, not only daring to do so without a ring on Cecilia's finger but doing it with such composure that it almost felt natural. Quinn's grip on his fork tightened as his jaw worked in silent contemplation. The sheer nerve of this boy was equal parts maddening and begrudgingly impressive. It's nice to meet you, brother. Valerian greeted Arthur warmly, extending his hand. And you as well. Cecilia's told me a lot about you, Arthur replied with an easy smile as they shook hands. Adeline, ever the gracious hostess despite her previous attempts to separate him from Cecilia, leaned in with polite curiosity. Arthur, I've heard quite a bit about your feats in the East, she began, her tone warmer than their last private conversation had been. I've been fortunate, Arthur said modestly. Fortunate. Adeline raised a brow, and Quinn could see a hint of the respect that had clearly grown since her failed attempt to convince Arthur to leave Cecilia. I'm not sure luck quite explains your achievements. Not many would be able to survive an encounter against a vampire ancestor despite not having crossed the wall. Arthur inclined his head respectfully. Yes, mother, I did. The casual use of the title made Quinn's eye twitch, but Adeline seemed pleased by Arthur's unwavering commitment to treating her as family, especially after he'd proven his dedication during their previous confrontation. Well, that explains your bravery, Adeline said with a soft chuckle, her smile laced with intrigue, both in battle and other situations. Her eyes glinted meaningfully, clearly referencing how Arthur had stood his ground when she tried to break up his relationship with Cecilia. Then, with a mischievous glint in her eye, she asked, So how was last night? Arthur and Cecilia both froze, their faces reddening as they instinctively avoided her gaze. Adeline's chuckle deepened at their synchronized awkwardness. The birthday banquet was enjoyable, wasn't it? Adeline continued, letting them off the hook. For now. You danced with all four of your companions again. Quite the charming young man, aren't you? The emphasis on "for" wasn't lost on anyone at the table. Quinn's jaw tightened further as he was reminded of exactly how complicated Arthur's romantic situation had become. Arthur let out a small sigh of relief, though Cecilia remained pressed against his arm, her cheeks still tinged pink. Valerian watched the exchange with quiet amusement, taking another sip of his drink. You're at the wall now, aren't you? Adeline asked, her gaze appraising. Have you heard about the epithet being discussed for you? Arthur tilted his head, curiosity evident. What is it? Personally, I thought Sword God would suit you best, but it seems like that might go to Lucifer Windward, she replied with a slight shrug. Then there's Twilight Emperor. though it feels a bit close to Celine Kagu's title. But the top contender right now is the Zenith Blade. Arthur raised an eyebrow at that. That's a weighty title. It is, Adeline agreed with a nod. It implies you'll surpass everyone, even with a sword god, in your generation. But well, you've earned it, haven't you? Especially after proving your resolve to those who might have doubted your commitment. The pointed reference to their previous encounter made Arthur straighten slightly, understanding the subtext. Of course he has, Cecilia chimed in confidently, her crimson eyes glinting mischievously. His sword is unmatched. The innuendo in her voice was unmistakable. Quinn's glass shattered in his hand as his grip tightened reflexively, and Valerian barely suppressed a laugh, his shoulders shaking with restrained amusement. Cecilia leaned closer to Arthur, her voice a soft whisper only he could hear. That was intentional, she teased before letting go of his arm to focus on her plate, leaving him to manage the aftermath of her playful jab while Quinn tried to regain his composure and Adeline watched the whole exchange with the satisfied air of someone whose initial judgment had been proven correct. Chapter 527. Lunch with the Emperor, 2. Why was Cecilia doing all this to torment her father? Simple revenge. If Cecilia had genuinely wanted to introduce Arthur to her family in a proper manner, she wouldn't have orchestrated something this outrageous. She might have been bold, but she wasn't reckless. No, this was all carefully calculated chaos, a way to needle her father in the most infuriating way possible. Cecilia knew exactly how maddening this situation was for Quinn, an audacious boyfriend, spending the night with his daughter, now casually dining with the family and boldly navigating the undercurrents of imperial formality. It was a perfect storm of aggravation, and Cecilia was reveling in it. That wasn't to say she didn't also want Arthur to get along with her family. Marriage was in their future, after all, and it would be awkward to hate your in-laws. But this particular meeting wasn't about diplomacy. This was about teaching her father a lesson. The moment she dropped her innuendo, her father's cup shattered in his hand, the tension in the air sharp enough to cut. Arthur, to his credit, remained as composed as ever. Too composed. Cecilia smirked, her thoughts alight with realization. I knew it. He's just pretending. Arthur wasn't nearly as intimidated by her father as he let on. He was playing his part perfectly, but beneath that mask of politeness lay a quiet confidence that only made her admire him more. For now, she would let the scene play out. After all, revenge was a dish best served with a side of chaos. And well, it's not like I'm lying, Cecilia thought, a sly smile tugging at her lips as she brushed her shoulder against Arthur's. Her waist still ached, a reminder of the prior evening's intensity, and that was why she leaned on Arthur's arm for support. Sure, she could have used mana to steady herself, but doing so would have been far too obvious. Everyone would notice, and in her mind it would feel like admitting defeat. Meanwhile, Arthur seemed perfectly fine, infuriatingly composed, as though nothing had happened. But that was beside the point. Right now, her focus was on her father, and exacting her little revenge. Quinn had been meddling too much in her love life lately, and it was grating. Yes, she understood that his intentions came from a place of protection and care, but there were limits. He'd crossed them, and now it was her turn to push back. She wasn't about to let his overbearing behavior slide without a response. Tolerating it would only encourage more of the same, and Cecilia Slatemark was not one to tolerate anything she found intolerable. And it was undeniably entertaining to see her usually stoic, unreadable father teeter on the edge of composure like this. While Cecilia quietly enjoyed her little victory, Quinn, on the other hand, was simmering with barely contained frustration. Not that he let it show fully. Years of imperial discipline had honed his ability to suppress outbursts. But this was pushing him to his limits. The problem wasn't just the situation, it was the sheer audacity of it. Arthur Nightingale, sitting there with a calm, unshakable presence, made it nearly impossible for Quinn to mount any sort of verbal counterattack. What could he say, really? By every practical measure, Arthur was an exceptional choice for Cecilia. As Adeline had so helpfully pointed out earlier, Arthur's epithet was likely to be Zenith Blade. a title that spoke volumes about the heights he was destined to reach. And it wasn't just empty words. Arthur was almost certain to ascend as the paragon of this generation, in an era filled with monstrous talent. Ren Kagu, for instance, had talent akin to Liam Kagu, a high Radiant rank legend in his time. But Ren's brilliance paled in comparison to Lucifer Windward's. And then there was Arthur, whose talent eclipsed even Lucifer's. Even the matter of his 4 future wives, something that might have raised eyebrows, wasn't a major issue in Quinn's mind. Cecilia, despite her fierce possessiveness, seemed perfectly content with the arrangement, and that was what mattered most. In imperial marriages, the Slatemark family usually expected their daughters to marry partners from powerful marquis houses or higher. Adeline herself was an exception, having come from a count family, but that was because Quinn had fallen for her hard. Cecilia, however, had managed something even more remarkable, falling for someone not only worthy of her status but also of her affection. And that someone was a nightingale. Truly remarkable, Quinn thought, his gaze lingering on Arthur. Like so many before him, he couldn't help but feel a quiet awe. There was something about Arthur, a sense of strength that bordered on the extraordinary, coupled with an undeniable aura of destiny. He would only grow stronger, Quinn realized, as the years passed. Stronger, sharper, more legendary. And while that thought didn't entirely ease his irritation, it did grant him some grudging respect for the young man. Quinn pursed his lips, his gaze steady on Arthur. I have heard much about your strength, but seen little of it myself. Arthur met Quinn's eyes with a calm, unwavering composure that spoke volumes. Of course, Quinn continued, his tone measured but carrying a subtle edge. I won't ask you to fight me. How about you duel with the Imperial Knights instead? The room seemed to hold its breath. The Imperial Knights were not just soldiers. They were a cornerstone of the Slatemark Empire's power. Elite and unparalleled, their ranks consisted only of ascendant rankers and higher, forming the sharpest blade of imperial might. Of the Empire's 1,500 ascendant rankers, a select 500 served directly under the imperial family in 10 divisions, each led by an immortal rank captain. They were warriors of legend, called upon only in the gravest of crises. Quinn himself had once commanded a division of these knights, deploying them to bring Marquis Orden to heel when the man refused to surrender Luke Orden for his descent into demonic temptation. But such actions were rare. The Imperial Knights were seldom used, not least because the Slatemark Empire was insulated from the black mana species plaguing other continents. Even the enigmatic Order of the Fallen Flame, situated within their borders, existed without direct conflict. Yet now Quinn wanted to see, to truly understand, just how strong is Arthur Nightingale? From the sheer force radiating from the young man, Quinn already had a suspicion. He would likely wipe the floor with any ordinary Imperial Knight, he thought grimly, his eyes narrowing. That was no small feat. Not even Lucifer Windward, with all his monstrous talent, could boast such a capability. To find a real test for him, Quinn might have to consider sending a vice-captain, a warrior among warriors. Quinn's lips twitched into the faintest hint of a smile. The boy had gall, standing there so poised, so unshaken. Arthur broke the silence. I accept, he said, his tone steady. But then, he added something that made Quinn's brow lift ever so slightly. But I want something in return. Quinn's smile deepened, a mix of amusement and respect glinting in his eyes. Bold, he thought. Very bold. Name your price, boy, Quinn replied, leaning forward ever so slightly. Let's see if you're as daring as you seem. I want the right for my guild to expand beyond the Slatemark Empire and operate officially on other continents, Arthur declared, his words cutting through the air like a blade. The table fell silent, and all eyes turned to him wide with shock. Even Cecilia seemed momentarily stunned, her usual smirk replaced by an expression of disbelief. Quinn's composure cracked. For a moment, he simply stared, then leaned back and let out a low whistle of appreciation. Arthur Nightingale, he said at last, his crimson eyes gleaming with interest. Do you even understand the weight of what you're asking? I do, Arthur replied, his voice calm and resolute. Quinn's amusement faded as his sharp gaze locked onto Arthur. The right to expand beyond the Empire's borders. It was no small request. Imperial law strictly regulated guild operations, requiring all Slatemark-registered guilds to remain within the Empire's boundaries. This wasn't just tradition, it was control, ensuring that the Empire's most powerful assets couldn't be poached by rival nations or operate independently beyond Imperial oversight. The law had been put in place centuries ago after several prominent guilds had defected to foreign powers, taking their knowledge, resources, and military might with them. Since then, any guild seeking to operate internationally had to choose: remain under Slatemark protection with restricted movement, or renounce their Imperial registration entirely and lose all the benefits that came with it. How does he even know the intricacies of Imperial guild law? Quinn wondered, his curiosity mingling with a flicker of annoyance. Most guild leaders were content to operate within the Empire's vast territories. Only those with truly ambitious vision would even consider such restrictions a limitation. Then let me raise the stakes, the Emperor finally said, his tone sharp. If you want the right to expand beyond our borders while maintaining your Imperial registration, you'll need to do more than spar with a standard Imperial knight. You must defeat a vice-captain. Arthur nodded, unfazed. Understood. But I have one more condition. Quinn raised an eyebrow. Go on. You will keep this arrangement confidential. No one is to know my guild has international operating rights until the time comes for us to use them, Arthur said, his gaze steady. Quinn regarded him for a long moment, his expression growing more serious. Then, his lips curled into a faint, almost predatory smile as a new thought occurred to him. Actually, boy, Quinn said, leaning back in his chair, I have a better proposition. You want international operating rights? You'll only get them when your guild sits on the empty throne. The room fell into stunned silence. Even Cecilia's eyes widened in shock. The empty throne, the symbolic seat that ruled over all guilds, yet remained perpetually vacant. It was a carefully maintained balance of power, representing the principle that no single guild should reign supreme over all others. Instead, the 12 diamond-rank guilds shared control of the guild system, each wielding immense influence but none claiming absolute dominion. For centuries, the empty throne had remained exactly that, empty. It was both a symbol of equality among the greatest guilds and a reminder of the catastrophic guild wars that had once torn the continent apart before the current system was established. Quinn's smile widened at Arthur's unflinching expression. You see, boy, anyone can ask for special privileges. But if you want to operate beyond the rules that bind all others, then prove you deserve to sit where no one else has dared. Claim the empty throne. Unite the guild system under your banner, and I'll grant you any operating rights you desire. Arthur was quiet for a moment, his mind clearly working through the implications. Then, to Quinn's surprise and grudging admiration, he nodded. Understood, Arthur said simply. When my guild claims the empty throne, I'll hold you to that promise. Quinn let out a bark of genuine laughter. You truly are audacious, aren't you? Very well. But remember, the 12 diamond-rank guilds won't simply step aside. You'll have to prove your guild is worthy of ruling them all. Arthur inclined his head. Then we have a deal. Chapter 528. The Imperial Duel 1. After lunch, we were guided to an expansive, state-of-the-art training ground housed within the palace itself. Sleek walls gleamed under fluorescent lighting, and the hum of mana-conducting technology blended seamlessly with the historic grandeur of the Slatemark Empire. Waiting for us was the 2nd Division of the Imperial Knights. At their helm stood their mid-immortal rank captain, a towering figure who ranked among the top 200 strongest in the world. Thankfully, he wasn't my opponent. Instead, my match was with the man standing just behind him. Shorter in stature but no less imposing, Nolan Wright's ice-blue hair gave him an almost serene air. Despite his relatively young age for someone of his rank, his presence commanded respect. As the vice-captain of the 2nd Division, Nolan was at peak ascendant rank, making him one of the top 300 warriors in the world. Facing him would be no easy feat. You're not nervous? I asked Cecilia, noting her unshaken confidence. Of course not, she said with a small smirk. If you can't beat someone like him, you're not the man I love. Her unwavering faith brought a smile to my face. I nodded in acknowledgement, her words bolstering my resolve. Are you not nervous? Luna's voice echoed in my mind. Was I? Perhaps. After all, Nolan was a formidable opponent, far stronger than most. But I had faced greater challenges, including an immortal ranker before. Back then, I only needed to survive. Today, I had to win. You can still back out, Quinn murmured, his tone a mix of challenge and warning. I simply shook my head, a flicker of mana propelling me onto the stage. Nolan exchanged a glance with his captain before leaping into the arena as well. Nice to meet you, he said. His tone surprisingly friendly and warm, contrasting with the stoic image one might expect from an Imperial Knight. I've heard a lot about you. Let's have a good match. Likewise, I replied, Evolvus materializing from my spatial ring in a flash of silver and crimson radiance. This wasn't a fight where I could afford to hold back. I activated everything. Seraphim's embrace amplified my senses to their peak, working seamlessly with soul vision, a gift from my soul resonance with Luna, sharpening every detail to crystal clarity. Mythic body fortified my physical frame, while lucent harmony balanced the storm of mana within me, ensuring a perfect synergy of strength and control. Wind mana coiled around my legs like serpents of air. Earth mana reinforced my stance with the stability of mountains, and fire mana began building in my core. A deadly arsenal waiting to be unleashed. But most importantly, I called upon Erebus's gift. Crimson bones materialized around my body, wrapping me in the Lich's bone armor. The jagged, pulsing plates weren't just protection, they were amplification. Each piece thrummed with dark power, multiplying my physical capabilities exponentially. My strength, already enhanced by mythic body, surged to new heights as the bone armor settled into place like a second skin. The transformation was both exhilarating and unsettling. The armor's power flowed through me like liquid shadow, enhancing every muscle fiber, every reflex, every instinct. I felt as though I could tear through steel with my bare hands or leap tall buildings in a single bound. This was power beyond mortal limitations. Across from me, Nolan's sword radiated a cool, flowing power, encased in water astral energy that seemed to ripple like a living tide. His eyes widened slightly as he took in my transformed appearance, the crimson bone armor giving me an almost demonic presence. Impressive, he said, his voice carrying newfound respect. I can see why you've earned such a reputation. Our eyes met briefly and then we moved. With a single step, I launched myself forward with bone-enhanced strength, and Nolan mirrored the motion with practiced precision. Our blades collided with a resounding clash that sent shockwaves rippling through the reinforced training ground, astral energy sparking and crackling outward from the point of impact. The difference was immediately apparent. Where before I might have struggled against true astral energy, the bone armor's enhancement allowed me to meet Nolan's power head-on. My enhanced strength, amplified by Erebus's gift, created a perfect equilibrium with his ascendant rank capabilities. Our blades pressed against each other, the clash reverberating through the arena like thunder. Nolan's sword felt like the relentless pull of an ocean tide. But I held firm, the bone armor channeling power through every fiber of my being as I focused my strength into Evolvus. Nolan's expression showed genuine surprise at my resistance. Each subsequent clash sent vibrations rippling through both our arms, but the bone armor absorbed and redistributed the impact, keeping me stable while he began to show signs of strain. His years of training were evident, but raw power enhanced by dark magic was proving to be a formidable equalizer. We separated briefly, circling each other like predators seeking an opening. I could feel the bone armor's power coursing through me, making every movement feel fluid and deadly. This was what it meant to transcend normal limitations. You're stronger than I expected, Nolan admitted, adjusting his grip on his sword. But strength alone won't be enough. He was right, of course. Nolan hadn't earned his position through raw power alone. He was a master of technique, strategy, and timing. But I had advantages he couldn't possibly anticipate. We clashed again, exchanging a rapid series of strikes that would have been invisible to untrained eyes. The training ground's protective magical runes hummed with increasing intensity as they absorbed the shockwaves of our battle. Without them, this sparring session would have reduced the arena to rubble within minutes. His strikes were precise and forceful, each one carrying the weight of mastered technique and years of disciplined training. But precision alone couldn't pierce through resolve backed by Erebus's power. The bone armor not only enhanced my physical capabilities but seemed to grant me an intuitive understanding of combat flow that went beyond conscious thought. I began to press my advantage, forcing Nolan to give ground as my enhanced speed and strength started to overwhelm his defenses. Each strike came faster than the last, the bone armor allowing me to chain attacks together in ways that should have been impossible for someone at my rank. But Nolan wasn't defenseless. Recognizing that conventional techniques weren't sufficient, he began to gather his astral energy for something more substantial. Snowflakes began to form at the tip of his blade, shimmering like fragile glass under the arena's intense illumination. They hovered momentarily before multiplying rapidly, creating a swirling constellation of frozen death. Each snowflake pulsed with astral energy, and I could sense the devastating power contained within their delicate forms. This wasn't ordinary swordplay anymore. It was the mark of true mastery, a grade 5 art. The snowflakes exploded outward in perfect synchronization, creating a blizzard of astral-enhanced ice that filled the arena. Each fragment struck with precision, battering against my defenses with the force of artillery shells. The bone armor absorbed much of the impact, its crimson surface crackling with protective energy as it deflected the worst of the assault. But the sheer volume and intensity still made me grit my teeth. I could feel the technique's true purpose. It wasn't just an attack, but an area denial weapon designed to control the battlefield and limit my mobility. Clever. Nolan was trying to neutralize my speed advantage by filling the entire arena with hazards. But I had my own grade 5 art to answer with. I exhaled slowly, centering myself as I called upon one of my most refined techniques. If Nolan wanted a battle of mastery, I would oblige him completely. Tempest Dance Technique. A grade 5 art that built momentum with every movement, a storm growing stronger with each strike. The bone armor's enhancement made each movement flow like liquid death, power building exponentially with every motion as I began the intricate sequence. It started subtly, almost deceptively so. A single downward slash that cut cleanly through several astral snowflakes, splitting them like fragile ornaments. The bone armor channeled the technique's essence, amplifying not just the physical force but the very concept of accumulated momentum. A thrust followed, faster than the first strike. Then a diagonal slash, faster still. The early movements, though precise, initially struggled against the overwhelming pressure of Nolan's snowflake barrage. His astral-enhanced ice pushed back with relentless force that would have overwhelmed me without the bone armor's protection. But Erebus's gift held firm, absorbing the strain and converting it into fuel for my building tempest. Slowly, inexorably, the true strength of Tempest Dance began to emerge. A gentle stream transformed into a roaring waterfall. The waterfall surged into a mighty river. The river expanded into a vast sea, and the sea swelled into an unrelenting ocean. Each strike compounded the momentum exponentially, the bone armor channeling and amplifying every movement beyond mortal limitations. The rhythm of my blade reached a crescendo that far surpassed anything I'd achieved before. The combination of mythic body and Erebus's bone armor created a synergy that pushed me into territory that shouldn't have been possible for integration rank. My sword became a force of nature, cutting through Nolan's snowflake technique like a hurricane tearing through a gentle snow shower. The arena filled with the sound of shattering ice and clashing energies as my ocean of strikes overwhelmed his defenses. Yet Nolan was no simple opponent, and he wasn't finished. His sword, wrapped in an intensifying pale blue glow of astral energy, began to tremble with a chilling resonance that made the very air around it freeze. It wasn't merely a weapon anymore. It was an embodiment of winter itself, vast and unyielding as a glacier. as my ocean of strikes surged forward with devastating force. His glacier met it head-on in a clash that made the previous exchanges seem like gentle sparring. The collision was cataclysmic. The force of his enhanced sword sent visible cracks through the tide I'd built, threatening to shatter my carefully constructed momentum. Ice and steel sang against each other in a harmony of destruction that filled the arena with blinding radiance. Then something changed in Nolan's technique. His sword began to beat with a rhythm I recognized, the unmistakable pulse of a sword heart made manifest. My ocean wavered. Cracks appeared in the overwhelming tide of strikes as his enhanced astral energy pushed back with renewed fury. The glacier was meeting the ocean, and for a terrifying moment, it seemed as though winter might triumph over the storm. But that was exactly the opening I had been waiting for. Nolan seized what he believed was his moment of victory, driving his blade forward in what should have been a decisive strike. His focus sharpened to a singular point of killing intent, his movements precise and deadly as he committed everything to this final assault. The confidence in his eyes told me he thought he had found the gap in my defenses. He was wrong. It was bait. Pure light gifted me speed and precision beyond mortal comprehension. My mythic body, enhanced by the bone armor's dark power, gave me flexibility and elasticity that bordered on the supernatural. As his blade surged forward with the inevitability of an avalanche, I shifted. With a burst of time and pure light magic working in perfect harmony, my body bent in ways that defied human anatomy. My feet swept from the ground, my head and chest arcing backward in an impossible evasion, while the bone armor flowed like liquid to accommodate the movement. His sword, guided by perfect technique and overwhelming power, cut through empty air where I had been mere microseconds before. Nolan's eyes widened in complete disbelief as his killing stroke found nothing but vacuum. The momentum of his committed attack left him exposed, overextended, his perfect form suddenly a liability. And in that moment of vulnerability I struck. Chapter 529. The Imperial Duel, 2. Quinn's brows knitted as he observed the duel unfold from his elevated position in the viewing area. His keen eyes, honed over decades of battle and governance, dissected every movement with the analytical precision of a master strategist studying a potential threat or ally. Arthur had already transcended the boundaries of integration rank in raw capability. That much was immediately apparent. His gifts and artifacts elevated his combat effectiveness to rival those of an ascendant ranker, though Quinn had expected that based on the boy's reputation. What he hadn't anticipated was the sheer sophistication of Arthur's approach to combat. The bone armor that had materialized around Arthur's frame was particularly intriguing. Quinn recognized it immediately. The crimson bones pulsed with malevolent energy, yet Arthur wielded them with the casual confidence of someone who had long since made peace with darkness. It was the fluidity that truly caught Quinn's attention, however. The precision, the relentless unpredictability that marked Arthur's every action. The Imperial Knights were undeniably strong in theory. They possessed immense mana reserves, practiced grade 5 arts with mechanical perfection, and bore the finest weapons. But strength without fire testing was brittle, and Quinn knew this better than most. These knights were prodigies raised in the safety of the Empire, their skills honed in controlled environments rather than forged in the crucible of life-or-death combat. They were, in Quinn's unspoken judgment, soft. Nolan Wright, for all his rank and accolades, exemplified this weakness perfectly. He was listed among the top 300 combatants in the world purely by virtue of his ascendant rank status, but that was a technicality that meant little in actual combat. Against hardened warriors who had weathered centuries of conflict, who had battled in the brutal chaos of the northern, southern, and western fronts, Nolan would crumble like parchment in a bonfire. And crumble he was. Arthur, despite his peak integration rank, fought with the ferocity and cunning of someone who had survived wars, not training exercises. Quinn had read the reports from the Eastern Continent, how Arthur had faced a mid-ascendant rank vampire elder and emerged victorious, and how he even survived an encounter with a low immortal rank vampire ancestor. This was no greenhouse sapling carefully cultivated in ideal conditions. Arthur was a tempered blade, honed by relentless combat, striking with surgical precision and unyielding aggression that spoke of battles where hesitation meant death. Nolan was simply not prepared for that level of lethality. Arthur's unpredictability, his refusal to follow conventional forms or honor traditional combat etiquette, left the knight reeling from the opening exchange. Every movement of Arthur's sword felt deliberate, as though it was a continuation of a strategy Nolan couldn't see but was trapped within like a fly in amber. Now, as Quinn watched, the duel reached its crescendo. Arthur had just executed that impossible evasion, bending his body in ways that defied human anatomy, and Nolan was completely exposed. Wind mana propelled Arthur forward as he closed the distance with inhuman speed, the bone armor making him faster than any integration ranker had a right to be. Quinn watched with fascination as Arthur seamlessly transitioned into close-quarters combat, his movements flowing like deadly water between different combat ranges. Arthur's fist, wrapped in concentrated bone armor enhancement and the full force of mythic body, shot forward. The strike connected with Nolan's elbow with surgical precision, the resounding impact echoing through the arena like thunder splitting the sky. The concentrated force, delivered at point-blank range and enhanced by the bone armor, sent shockwaves through Nolan's arm that his ascendant-rank constitution could barely absorb. His sword wavered, nearly falling from nerveless fingers. He held on, Quinn observed with grudging respect for his knight. Even with the bone armor's enhancement, Nolan's resilience was genuinely impressive. But Arthur wasn't finished. He flowed seamlessly into the next movement of his close-quarters art, his leg coiling around Nolan's weakened arm in a grappling technique that locked the knight in a vice-like grip enhanced by the bone armor's supernatural strength. Using the momentum of Nolan's forced movement, Arthur leveraged his opponent's body to propel himself forward, earth mana reinforcing his skull, while the bone armor's plating concentrated around his forehead like a battering ram. The headbutt that followed was almost insulting in its effectiveness, yet perfectly controlled. Nolan was sent crashing to the reinforced ground with bone-rattling force, and Arthur didn't waste even a heartbeat, his sword rising above the fallen knight with predatory hunger as he poured his intent into the blade. Hollow Eclipse, the second movement of Arthur's Grade 6 art. Nolan's desperate response showed why he had earned his position despite Quinn's assessment of Imperial Knight softness. The ice wave that erupted from his prone position was the kind of technique that would have ended most fights decisively. The astral energy involved was substantial, the area coverage complete, the tactical thinking sound under pressure. Arthur answered it by taking to the air with casual elegance that made Quinn's analytical mind recalculate everything he thought he knew about mana manipulation. Wind mana formed solid platforms beneath Arthur's feet as he suspended himself upside down, defying gravity as if it were merely a polite suggestion rather than an immutable law. The bone armor began to fade from Arthur's form as he prepared his final technique, the crimson plating dissolving into motes of dark energy that dissipated into the air. What replaced it was something far more extraordinary. God Flash. Absolute wasn't just a technique. It was a theological statement made manifest. The pillar of radiance that erupted downward carried the weight of pure divine judgment, untainted by darkness yet wielded by someone who had just demonstrated mastery over undeath itself. The strike descended like the wrath of contradictory gods, and Quinn found himself holding his breath as he witnessed something that would redefine his understanding of what magic could accomplish in the right hands. The precision of the final blow was what elevated it from mere spectacle to artistry of the highest order. Arthur could have obliterated Nolan completely, could have reduced him to component atoms, could have made his defeat so overwhelming that it would have broken the man's spirit forever. Instead, he delivered exactly the calculated amount of force needed to render his opponent unconscious while leaving him completely unharmed. That level of control spoke to a mastery that went beyond technique or raw power. It suggested an understanding of combat that was almost philosophical in its depth and sophistication. As Arthur descended gracefully and the bone armor began to fade like morning mist, Quinn found himself fundamentally reassessing everything he thought he knew about the young man. This wasn't just exceptional talent or even prodigious skill developed through intense training. This was someone who had already begun to transcend conventional understanding of what combat could be, what magic could achieve, what the human form could accomplish when pushed beyond its apparent limitations. The empty throne suddenly seemed less like an impossible goal and more like an inevitable destination waiting for its rightful occupant. "Remarkable," Adeline murmured beside him, her voice carrying a note of genuine awe that Quinn rarely heard from his typically composed wife. "I've never seen anyone transition so seamlessly between such opposing power sources. The control required must be extraordinary." "Nor have I," Quinn admitted, his analytical mind still processing the staggering implications of what he'd just witnessed. To wield both deep dark and pure light with such mastery, most practitioners spend lifetimes mastering just one such discipline. Yet he switches between them as if they're merely different tools in the same arsenal. As they watched Arthur speaking quietly with Cecilia, Quinn found himself genuinely curious about what other capabilities the young man might be concealing beneath his calm exterior. Today's demonstration had been impressive enough to rewrite textbooks, but something in Arthur's composed demeanor told him it was merely the tip of an iceberg whose full dimensions remained hidden beneath still waters. "You performed exactly as I expected," Cecilia said to Arthur, her voice carrying that teasing affection that made her father's eye twitch with involuntary paternal concern. "I had to, didn't I? For you," Arthur replied with such genuine sincerity and devotion that Quinn almost felt guilty about his protective instincts. "Oh, and not because you're getting that little reward from father?" Cecilia asked with the kind of knowing smile that suggested she understood the full scope and implications of what had just been negotiated. Arthur met her gaze with calm honesty that impressed Quinn despite himself. "I would have done it without the promise of any reward. That's just an extra benefit. Compared to you, it hardly matters at all." Quinn watched his daughter's expression soften as she heard those words, saw the genuine warmth that broke through her usually confident and somewhat calculating demeanor, and felt some of his paternal resistance beginning to crumble. The boy might be audacious beyond all reasonable measure, might be accumulating romantic entanglements that would make an ancient sultan envious, might be pursuing goals that bordered on the megalomaniacal in their scope and ambition, but his devotion to Cecilia appeared to be completely and utterly authentic. "Well done," Quinn said, stepping forward and clearing his throat to announce his presence and bring the intimate moment to a close. His tone was gruff, but there was a begrudging nod of approval in his posture that he couldn't quite suppress. "You'll receive your promised reward within the week," as agreed. Arthur bowed with practiced respect that somehow managed to convey both proper deference to imperial authority and quiet confidence in his own capabilities. "Thank you for your generosity, Your Majesty." As Quinn returned the bow with a slight but meaningful nod, he found himself wondering if he'd just witnessed the rise of a new legend or the birth of something even more historically significant. The empty throne had remained vacant for centuries, its symbolic weight serving as a constant reminder that no single entity should hold absolute dominion over all others. But if a nightingale was going to sit upon it, perhaps that was destiny as well. Chapter 530, Shadow on. "Wow, I can't believe it," Arya said with the sort of grin that belonged to a younger sibling who had just discovered her older brother had done something simultaneously scandalous and heroic. Her hand flew up to cover her mouth in mock shock, but the gleeful mischief dancing in her eyes was about as subtle as a meteor strike in a monastery. "I had just returned from spending the night at the Imperial Palace." The Imperial Palace. You'd think that level of social impossibility would buy me at least a moment's peace at home, but apparently not. My mother, Alice, being the seasoned emotional strategist she was, simply greeted me with a knowing nod and one of her brightest smiles, the kind that said she had noticed everything and had already formed several detailed opinions about it. She had clearly pieced together exactly what my absence meant, and just as clearly decided not to interrogate me about it immediately, which, in the complex world of maternal politics, was both a mercy and a warning. Arya, however, possessed all the social restraint of a supernova in a crystal shop. "I already ate," I said preemptively, hoping to head off any potential maternal fussing, while also avoiding the increasingly predatory look my sister was directing at me. It was the expression of someone who knew secrets, or was fully prepared to invent them if I didn't provide satisfactory confirmation of her suspicions. Alice turned back toward the kitchen with a spring in her step, humming a cheerful little melody that immediately put me on high alert. She was far too happy about this situation. Either she was genuinely thrilled that I hadn't accidentally created an international incident by insulting the Empress, or she had already started mentally planning wedding arrangements with the imperial family, which, to be completely honest, wasn't entirely off the mark. Arya leaned in conspiratorially, as if she suspected the walls themselves might be equipped with surveillance equipment. She dropped her voice to what she probably thought was a whisper, but sounded more like controlled excitement barely contained by teenage discretion. "Did you actually eat breakfast with her family?" she asked, her eyes bright with the kind of anticipation usually reserved for gossip of legendary proportions. "Wow! How did she figure that out so quickly?" Luna's voice echoed with amusement in my mind. I found myself wondering the same thing. I hadn't told anyone about the specifics of my visit. There had been no official announcements, no leaked information to social networks, no palace press releases. Just an incredibly tense and politically charged meal shared around a very expensive dining table. "Yes," I answered simply, because attempting to lie to Arya was not only pointless but potentially dangerous. She had developed an almost supernatural ability to detect deception, and once she caught you in a lie, she became absolutely relentless in her pursuit of the truth. Her eyes widened to approximately the size of dinner plates, her jaw dropped in theatrical shock, and she immediately launched into the kind of dramatic overreaction that could power a small city. "Oh my God, you actually sat down and ate with the Emperor and Empress after everything that happened? Brother, how are you even still alive right now?" I didn't respond immediately, partly because I was still processing that question myself. The memory of Empress Adeline's carefully calculated smile, the kind that suggested she was already measuring me for a very specific type of future trouble, remained vivid in my mind. And then there was Emperor Quinn's intense scrutiny, the way he had studied me throughout the entire meal, as if trying to determine whether I was made of tempered steel or fragile glass. Instead of attempting to explain the complex dynamics of imperial family politics over breakfast, I reached out and deliberately messed up Arya's carefully styled hair. It was petty, immature, and incredibly satisfying in the way that only sibling interactions could be. "Hey!" she yelped indignantly, immediately swatting at my retreating hand with the righteous fury of someone whose morning routine had been completely destroyed. "I spent 20 minutes styling it this morning." "Yes," I replied with deliberate calm. "And now it looks exactly as chaotic as your imagination tends to be." She crossed her arms and launched into a full-scale pout, her cheeks puffing up with indignation like an offended hamster. But beneath all that practiced teenage defiance, I could see something else entirely. Bride. Genuine admiration. The kind of wonder that came from realizing that her older brother had not only survived a night at the most powerful palace in the empire, but had somehow managed to navigate breakfast with the imperial family without starting a war. The moment of levity faded as I noticed something in her posture, a subtle shift that made me pay closer attention. "Anyway, Ms. Rank 100, I said, attempting to inject some playful teasing into my voice, though it came out less sarcastic than I'd intended. "Don't you want to improve your standing?" Arya's defensive mechanisms activated immediately. She folded her arms across her chest in the universal gesture of impending teenage resistance and turned her head away with that particular sharp tilt that adolescence had perfected somewhere between developing angst and cultivating ego. "I can't help it," she muttered, her voice carrying an undertone I hadn't expected. "The other students were just born different from me." That stopped me cold. Her tone wasn't angry or sassy or dramatic in the way I'd grown accustomed to hearing from her. It was flat, hollow, like someone who had practiced not caring because caring too much had become too painful to sustain. "Hey," I said gently, all teasing forgotten. She looked up at me then, and I saw something in her eyes that hit me like a physical blow. Not tears, not yet, but something far more dangerous. Resentment mixed with exhaustion. The kind of deep frustration that builds up in your bones when sustained effort meets an immovable wall again and again and again. "You know I'm not wrong, Arthur," she said, her voice sharp around the edges like broken glass. "I was lucky to even get accepted into Slatemark Academy. Lucky. I'm not like you. I found myself without an immediate response. What could I possibly say? Some empty platitude about hidden potential? A motivational speech about hard work conquering everything? She would see through that kind of hollow encouragement in seconds. Nobody understood their own limitations quite like someone who had been repeatedly told they were supposed to be exceptional. She turned away from me then, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, but somehow it rang louder and clearer than anything else in the room. After all, without natural talent, everything else is meaningless, isn't it? The words landed with devastating accuracy, cutting deeper than they should have. Maybe because they contained too much raw honesty, too much painful truth that neither of us really wanted to acknowledge. Arya was currently mid-yellow rank, which by most reasonable standards wasn't actually terrible. But at Slatemark Academy, now undisputedly the premier magical institution in the world since Mythos Academy had been, well, effectively destroyed, being mid-yellow rank was barely enough to keep your head above water. The competition was fierce, the standards were astronomical, and mediocrity was treated like a contagious disease. And when it came to talent, I couldn't lie to myself about the fundamental inequity of our situations. I had been blessed with advantages that most people could only dream of. Grade 6 swordsmanship talent that allowed me to learn techniques that others couldn't even comprehend. Soul resonance with Luna that granted me capabilities beyond normal human limitations. Intelligence sharp enough to bend entire systems to my will when necessary. A constellation of natural gifts that, when combined, had transformed me into something approaching legendary status. And the most frustrating part? I hadn't asked for any of it. These abilities had simply been there from the beginning, like cheat codes built into my personal operating system that I hadn't even known existed until I started playing the game of life at the highest levels. But Arya? She had none of those advantages. She was working with Dad's old grade 4 sword art, reliable and well-tested certainly, but not revolutionary or groundbreaking. She hadn't been born with a gift that could alter reality around her. No rare elemental affinities that would make her techniques naturally more powerful. No secret bloodline abilities waiting to be unlocked. No divine interventions or cosmic coincidences. Just pure, grinding effort. And even that had natural limits that couldn't be overcome through willpower alone. To push your mana rank beyond the glacially slow pace dictated by your natural talent ceiling, you had to be willing to walk through hell itself. Or worse, you had to genuinely want to walk through hell because something inside you demanded that level of sacrifice. The way I had done out of sheer necessity, driven by circumstances that had left me no choice but to transcend normal limitations or die trying. Arya didn't have that kind of desperate fire burning inside her. Or maybe she did, but it had nothing substantial to fuel itself on, no great purpose or driving ambition that could justify the kind of suffering required to break through talent barriers. What can I actually do for her? I wondered, watching her walk away with shoulders tense and jaw set like she was preparing to fight a world that didn't even know her name existed. The question haunted me because I genuinely had no answer. There was no guidebook for dealing with siblings who hadn't been chosen by fate. No manual for helping someone you love when the universe had simply decided to distribute its gifts unequally. Sometimes, being exceptional just made you more aware of how cruel that exception really was. Chapter 531. Shadow 2. Arthur didn't understand. Of course he didn't. That thought settled into my mind like a stone in still water, heavy and immovable as I retreated to my room. It wasn't his fault, not really. Blaming Arthur for being exceptional was like blaming the sun for shining. It was simply his nature. He'd always been special, gifted, brilliant, and frustratingly humble about it all. As a child, he was the boy teachers would point to during parent conferences, saying, "Be more like him." And I would think desperately, if I could, I would. But those words never left my throat. Because even when he was collecting gold stars and awards and recognition from every corner of the academy, he remained genuinely kind. That made it worse somehow. He'd reached silver rank at 15 and entered Class 1A of Mythos Academy, as if the world had been waiting for him all along. The most insufferable part wasn't his success. It was that he never acted superior about it. He wasn't arrogant or condescending. He was simply maddeningly perfect. Then everything escalated beyond normal bounds. He grew stronger, more intelligent, increasingly influential. The kind of influential where celebrities became friends visiting him at home. And many of them harbored genuine feelings for him. That was obvious to anyone who paid attention. He defeated Lucifer Windward in single combat. Lucifer Windward, the crown prince of the northern continent and widely regarded as the most talented of his generation. This wasn't just any victory, but a duel for the rank 1 position at Mythos Academy, the most prestigious institution in the world at the time. Arthur's response to this historic achievement? He continued improving, as if progress was inevitable rather than extraordinary. The truly maddening aspect was that he earned every bit of it. He didn't coast on natural ability alone. He trained relentlessly, bled for his victories, suffered defeats and rose again stronger. This made resentment impossible, because you couldn't dismiss his accomplishments as mere luck or favoritism. So where did that leave me? I had managed admission to Slatemark Academy, which was genuinely prestigious and had become the premier institution after Mythos's fall. I had harbored hopes, not grandiose dreams, but reasonable expectations. Perhaps I could reach rank 50, maybe even 40 if circumstances aligned favorably. I had assumed that being Arthur Nightingale's sister carried some significance. Surely our shared bloodline meant something. My brother was courting multiple princesses and a marquis's daughter, displayed talent that historians would remember, and maintained perfect composure under pressure. The universe owed me some small portion of that legacy. But the universe, it seemed, operated on a merit-based system that cared nothing for family connections. Slatemark Academy was a proving ground disguised as a school. My classmates were phenomenal talents. Young people who had been immersed in magical theory since childhood, who commanded multiple elements with casual ease, who treated advanced techniques as basic exercises. They moved through the curriculum like it was designed specifically for them. I applied myself completely. I studied every available resource, practiced until exhaustion, sought additional instruction whenever possible. But all that effort barely maintained my position. Every small advancement required enormous struggle, and just when I thought I might achieve stability, another transfer student would arrive from across the continent, armed with superior training and natural gifts, effortlessly surpassing months of my progress. Arthur's greatest setback had been placing second in a single competition. He had never faced expulsion threats or concerned meetings with advisors who suggested alternative career paths. No one ever whispered about his unsuitability for combat roles or hinted that he might find fulfillment in support positions. His path consisted of one triumph building upon another, an unbroken chain of achievement that seemed almost divinely ordained. He couldn't comprehend what it felt like to strain constantly just to remain mediocre, to watch others accomplish effortlessly what took me everything I had to attempt poorly, to live with the constant awareness that no amount of determination could overcome the fundamental limitations I had been born with. In his world, hard work led to success. Dedication yielded results. The correlation between effort and achievement was clear and reliable. He had never experienced the crushing realization that sometimes, no matter how much you want something or how hard you work for it, you simply aren't capable of reaching it. He didn't understand what it meant to love someone whose very existence highlighted your own inadequacy, to be proud of their accomplishments while simultaneously being reminded of your own limitations, to want desperately to share in their world while knowing you would never truly belong there. Every conversation we had about improvement or training carried an implicit assumption that I possessed untapped potential waiting to be unlocked. He spoke as if my struggles were temporary obstacles rather than fundamental constraints. His encouragement, though well-intentioned, only emphasized the vast gulf between his reality and mine. I loved my brother. I was proud of his achievements and grateful for his concern. But his success cast a shadow that made my own efforts seem insignificant by comparison. He blazed across the sky like a comet, brilliant and impossible to ignore, while I remained earthbound, looking up and wondering what it might feel like to fly. The worst part was knowing that he genuinely wanted to help. If there had been some magical solution, some technique or resource that could elevate me to his level, he would have provided it without hesitation. But the gap between us wasn't something that could be bridged through external assistance. It was written into the very fabric of who we were. He inhabited a world where extraordinary was ordinary, where breaking through limitations was expected, where the impossible became merely challenging. I lived in a world where ordinary was an achievement, where maintaining my position required constant struggle, where dreams had to be carefully measured against reality. Arthur didn't understand, and perhaps that was for the best. Some kinds of understanding came only through experience, and I wouldn't wish this particular experience on him. His inability to comprehend my limitations was itself a testament to how fundamentally different our paths had always been. The distance between us wasn't measured in rank or achievement, but in the basic assumptions we made about what was possible. For him, the question was how high he could climb. For me, it was whether I could avoid falling any further. And in the quiet of my room, surrounded by textbooks and practice materials that represented so much effort for so little progress, I had to accept that some questions didn't have satisfying answers. Some struggles didn't lead to triumphant conclusions. Sometimes, the most you could hope for was the strength to continue trying, even when you knew the odds were stacked against you. Arthur would never understand that kind of quiet desperation, and I was grateful he didn't have to. Chapter 532. Shadow 3. I did feel guilty about what I was doing. Arthur had made it clear that he planned to spend significant time at home over the coming months, a deliberate effort to make up for the worry he'd caused us during his extended absences. First, there had been those 11 months when he'd vanished to the northern border without warning, leaving us to wonder if he was alive or dead. Then came his involvement in the Eastern Continent's war, another period of sleepless nights and unanswered questions for our family. So my sudden enthusiasm for social activities, my increased requests to spend time with friends from Slatemark Academy, was directly undermining his intentions. I knew this, and yet I couldn't bring myself to stop. The alternative, sitting at home while he unconsciously demonstrated his superiority in every casual conversation, felt infinitely worse. That's how I found myself at Meridian Cafe in Avalon's upscale commercial district, surrounded by the familiar chaos of teenage conversation and the aroma of synthetically enhanced coffee blends. The establishment's holographic menu flickered softly above each table, and the climate control system maintained perfect temperature despite the afternoon crowds. The group that had assembled represented a cross-section of Slatemark's social hierarchy. Commoners who had earned their places through sheer determination, and noble children whose presence was expected rather than surprising. Elena Voss sat across from me, her auburn hair catching the filtered light from the cafe's smart glass windows that automatically adjusted for optimal ambience. The daughter of a successful tech merchant family, she possessed the kind of practical intelligence that made her invaluable during group projects and the sort of steady friendship that didn't fluctuate with academic rankings. Beside her, Marcus Chun was methodically working through what appeared to be his third lab-grown pastry, his commoner background evident in his appreciation for food that others took for granted in Avalon's abundance. I still can't believe Professor Valdez assigned a 15-page analysis on theoretical mana applications, Elena groaned, rubbing her temples. As if we don't have enough to worry about with the practical exams coming up. At least you're not struggling with advanced combat theory, Marcus muttered, crumbs falling from his pastry. I swear Baron Aldrich designs those scenarios specifically to make commoners feel inadequate. Lydia Ashworth, the Earl's daughter, adjusted her posture with the unconscious elegance that came from years of deportment training. Baron Aldrich is actually quite fair. He simply expects everyone to think tactically, regardless of background. Her voice carried that particular cadence of nobility, measured, precise, never hurried. Though I admit his methods can be intense. Easy for you to say, James Blackwood interjected, his dark eyes reflecting the glow from his personal device's screen. Your family's been studying military strategy for generations. Some of us are learning this from scratch. The Viscount's son had a way of making observations that sounded both bitter and resigned. Not angry exactly, but aware of the advantages others possessed through birthright alone. That's not entirely true, Elena defended, her merchant pragmatism showing. My family's background actually helps with logistics and resource management aspects. Different perspectives have their advantages. I found myself nodding along, grateful for the familiar rhythm of academic complaints. These conversations were comfortable, normal, the kind of discussion that reminded me why I valued these friendships despite the constant pressure we all faced at Slatemark. Speaking of advantages, Marcus continued, did anyone else notice how Countess Meredith's daughter somehow knew exactly which practical scenarios would be on the midterm? Information networks, James replied knowingly. Noble families maintain extensive intelligence gathering. It's not technically cheating if the information is publicly available through the right channels. Right channels that require connections we don't have, Elena pointed out with mild frustration. Welcome to the real world, Lydia said, though not unkindly. Networking is as important as studying. More important in many cases. The conversation meandered through familiar territory. Complaints about professors, upcoming assignments, the social dynamics that made academy life both enriching and exhausting. It was the kind of discussion that made me feel normal, like just another student struggling with the same challenges as everyone else. Then Marcus, scrolling through his news feed while eating, suddenly straightened in his seat. Oh wow! Did you guys see this? He turned his smart tablet toward the group, the holographic display casting blue light across his face. There's breaking news about the Eastern Coalition's formal announcement. And just like that, the conversation shifted to the topic that seemed to dominate every social gathering these days. I still can't believe your brother actually did it, said Lydia, her noble bearing evident in every carefully modulated syllable. The Earl's daughter had a way of making even casual observations sound like pronouncements. Defeating a vice-captain of the Imperial Knights? At integration rank. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, the familiar knot forming in my stomach. It was just a sparring match. Just a sparring match? Marcus nearly choked on his pastry, setting down his smart tablet where live news feeds continued scrolling. Arya, that vice-captain was peak ascendant rank. Do you understand what that means? He leaned forward, crumbs still clinging to his shirt. Your brother fought someone who could probably level half this district and won. Did you see the announcement from the Eastern Continent? Lydia produced her latest model phone, its holographic display projecting a three-dimensional news interface. They're officially awarding him the Order of the Crimson Dawn. The hologram rotated slowly, showing official seals and ceremonial imagery. The vote was unanimous through their blockchain-verified council system. That makes it 3 civilian honors from 3 different continents. 3. Marcus looked genuinely confused, setting down his pastry to pay closer attention. The Medal for Merit from our own Slatemark Empire. Elena counted off on her fingers, clearly having researched this extensively. The Star of Valor from the Northern Continent for his work against the Shadow Seekers. And now the Order of the Crimson Dawn from the Eastern Coalition, Lydia continued, for delaying that vampire ancestor and saving Princess Seraphina Zenith during the war. That's unprecedented for someone his age, James observed with genuine admiration. My grandfather has 2 such medals, and he's considered one of the most distinguished diplomats of his generation. I found myself caught between pride and discomfort again. These were my friends, people I genuinely cared about, and their admiration for Arthur was both justified and sincere. Yet hearing them discuss my brother with such reverence created a peculiar distance. It was as if they were talking about a legendary figure rather than the person who had ruffled my hair that morning. Speaking of Princess Seraphina, Elena said with barely contained excitement. The relationship confirmations are everywhere now. Marcus looked up from his tablet, suddenly alert. Wait, what? What relationship confirmations? You haven't been following the story? Lydia raised an eyebrow in genuine surprise. It's been the biggest news cycle in months. She manipulated her holographic display, pulling up what appeared to be a comprehensive news compilation. Arthur Nightingale is officially confirmed to be romantically involved with 3 princesses and a marquis's daughter. 4 people. Marcus nearly dropped his pastry. He's dating 4 of the most powerful women on multiple continents simultaneously? Princess Rachel Creighton of the Northern Continent. Elena listed with the precision of someone who had been following every development. Princess Cecilia Slatemark of our own empire here on the central continent. Princess Seraphina Zenith of the eastern continent, Lydia added. And Lady Rose Springshaper, daughter of Marquis Springshaper right here in the Slatemark Empire. James leaned back in his chair, his political mind clearly working through implications. And they all know about each other. The diplomatic ramifications alone are staggering. He gestured with his device, which displayed what looked like complex relationship charts. He's essentially created a romantic alliance network that spans 3 continents and includes 4 of the most politically significant unmarried women in the known world. How does that even work? Elena wondered aloud, her practical nature showing. I mean, logistically speaking, how do you maintain relationships with 4 women of such high status? Very carefully, I imagine, Lydia replied with dry humor. Though from what I understand, it's not entirely uncommon among the highest levels of nobility. Power marriages often involve complex arrangements. But these aren't arranged marriages, Marcus pointed out, still looking stunned. The reports say these are genuine romantic relationships. He actually convinced 3 princesses and a marquis's daughter to share him willingly, which is either incredibly romantic or completely insane, Elena added with a laugh. I can't decide which. The conversation continued, but I found myself retreating internally. This wasn't just idle gossip. Arthur's romantic life had become a matter of international interest, with political analysts debating the implications of his choices and news networks tracking his movements between continents. Arya. Elena turned her attention to me with bright curiosity. What's it actually like? Having a brother who's basically become the most eligible bachelor in recorded history. The question caught me off guard, as it always did. How could I explain that Arthur still left his dishes in the sink sometimes? That he hummed off-key while practicing sword forms in our garden? That he remained fundamentally the same caring older brother, even as the world began treating him like a mythical figure? Chapter 533. Shadow 4. It's complicated, I said carefully. He's still just Arthur at home. But surely he must train constantly? Marcus pressed, leaning forward with genuine interest. I mean, to reach that level of skill, he must have some incredible regimen. He practices regularly, I admitted. But he also spends time reading, helps with family dinners, worries about normal things. He's not some training-obsessed automaton. That almost makes it more impressive, Lydia observed thoughtfully. The fact that he maintains such humanity while achieving these impossible things. Most prodigies I've known become so focused on advancement that they lose touch with everything else. The relationship management alone must be exhausting, Elena added with a slightly envious tone. Coordinating schedules across 3 continents, maintaining emotional connections through long-distance communication, handling the political pressures. Don't forget the security concerns, James interjected. Dating 3 princesses simultaneously makes you a target for every enemy of every kingdom involved. Is that why he's been staying home more? Marcus asked me directly. Security protocols? I felt trapped by the question. The real reason Arthur was staying home was to spend time with family, to make up for his long absences. But explaining that would require acknowledging how his fame had affected our family dynamics. He just wants to spend time with us, I said simply. That's actually kind of sweet, Elena said with genuine warmth. Despite everything else going on, family still matters to him. Of course it does, Lydia agreed. Family connections are foundational to everything else. Without that stability, managing his other relationships would be impossible. The conversation continued to revolve around Arthur, but it had shifted into more personal territory. My friends were trying to understand him as a person rather than just analyzing his achievements or political significance. Do you think he's happy? Elena asked suddenly. I mean, genuinely happy? All this success and recognition, but also all this pressure and responsibility. The question surprised me with its sincerity. I thought about Arthur's smile that morning, the way he tried to make me laugh, his genuine concern for my own struggles. I think so, I said honestly. He's dealing with a lot, but he seems content, like he's found his purpose. That's probably the most important thing, Marcus observed. Purpose makes everything else manageable. Easy to say when you have clear talents and obvious paths forward, James added with slight bitterness. Some of us are still figuring out where we fit. The comment resonated with me more than I cared to admit. Arthur had found his purpose, his place in the world, his path to legendary status. The rest of us were still struggling to understand our own potential. Speaking of fitting in, Elena said, clearly trying to change the subject, did anyone else get completely destroyed by Professor Valdez's practical examination? Oh God, yes, Marcus groaned. I couldn't even complete the third scenario. Which one was that? Lydia asked. Multi-target engagement while maintaining defensive formations, Marcus replied. I lost track of half my supposed allies and accidentally attacked a friendly unit. That's actually not uncommon, Elena assured him. Those scenarios are designed to be overwhelming. Professor Valdez wants us to experience failure in controlled environments. Well, mission accomplished, James said dryly. I've never felt more incompetent in my life. The conversation returned to familiar academic complaints, but I found myself only half listening. My friend's earlier discussion about Arthur kept echoing in my mind. Their admiration, their analysis, their genuine curiosity about his personal life. They saw him as an inspiration, a symbol of what was possible through talent and determination. For them, his achievements were motivating proof that extraordinary things could be accomplished by people not much older than ourselves. For me, his success was a constant reminder of everything I wasn't and likely never could be. Every accolade he earned, every impossible feat he accomplished, served to highlight the vast distance between what he could achieve and what I could barely attempt. Arya, you've been quiet, Elena observed, her concern genuine. Everything okay? I forced a smile, the same expression I'd been perfecting for months. Just thinking about everything you've said. It's strange. Hearing people discuss your brother like he's already a historical figure. Well, Lydia said with the matter-of-fact tone that came with noble upbringing. He probably will be. Someone who accomplishes this much before turning 19 isn't going to fade into obscurity. She gestured with her phone, which still displayed various news articles about Arthur's achievements. We might actually be witnessing the early stages of a genuinely legendary career. Plus the romantic aspect adds a whole other dimension, Elena added. Love stories involving royalty always become part of historical record, especially when they're this politically significant. Future historians will probably write entire books about the diplomatic implications of his relationship choices. James agreed. The man who united 3 continents through romance. That would make a great title for a biography, Marcus laughed. Though I bet the reality is more complicated than it would appear in history books. As my friends continued their discussion, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was watching Arthur's transformation from beloved brother to public figure in real time. The person they described, this paragon of achievement and possibility, was undeniably the same Arthur who worried about family dinners and tried to make me laugh. But he was also becoming something larger than that, something that belonged as much to the world as to our family. Each achievement carried him further from the center of my small world and deeper into a realm where ordinary people like me could only observe from a distance. We should probably head back, Elena said, checking the time on her device. Professor Martinez wanted to review our group project before tomorrow's presentation. Right, Marcus agreed, gathering his things. Can't afford to lose points on something that's straightforward. As we prepared to leave, Lydia turned to me one final time. Arya, I hope you know how lucky you are. Having someone like Arthur as family, that's not something everyone gets to experience. I nodded, managing another smile. I know. I really do. And I did know. I was proud of Arthur, genuinely proud, and grateful for his love and support. But luck was a complicated thing when it came in the form of a brother whose very existence highlighted your own limitations. As we walked back toward the Academy District, my friends continued discussing Arthur's latest achievements, their voices filled with admiration and excitement. I listened, participated when expected, and tried to ignore the growing sense that each of his triumphs carried me a little further from the center of his world and a little deeper into the shadow he cast simply by existing. The afternoon sun filtered through Avalon's smart glass buildings, creating patterns of light and shadow that shifted as we walked. Somewhere in the distance, the city's automated systems hummed with quiet efficiency, managing the complex infrastructure that supported millions of lives. We were just approaching the Academy District when my phone buzzed with a message notification. I pulled it out, expecting another reminder about tomorrow's assignments or maybe a family message about dinner plans. Instead, I saw Arthur's name on the display. "Hey, I'm nearby. Want me to pick you up? I can give your friends a ride too if they need one." I stared at the message, my stomach doing an odd flip. Arthur was here, in person, while my friends were still deep in discussion about his legendary status and romantic entanglements. "Everything okay?" Elena asked, noticing I'd stopped walking. I started, then hesitated. "How exactly did you tell your friends that the person they'd been discussing like a mythical figure for the past hour was about to show up in real life?" Before I could figure out how to respond, I heard a familiar voice behind us. "Arya." I turned around, and there he was, Arthur Nightingale, walking toward us with that easy confidence that seemed effortless. His black hair catching the afternoon light. He was dressed casually, just dark jeans and a simple jacket, but somehow still managed to look like he belonged on magazine covers. My friends had gone completely silent. Marcus dropped his tablet. Elena's augmented contact lenses flickered rapidly, as if trying to process what she was seeing. Lydia, for perhaps the first time in her noble life, appeared to have lost the ability to speak. James just stared, his mouth slightly open. "Sorry I'm a bit late," Arthur said as he reached us, completely oblivious to the effect his presence was having. Traffic through the commercial district was terrible. Something about a new product launch causing crowds. He smiled at the group, the same warm, genuine expression I saw every day at home. "You must be Arya's friends from the Academy."
I'm Arthur.
As if they didn't know exactly who he was. As if they hadn't just spent the last hour analyzing every aspect of his life and achievements. As if he wasn't currently the most famous person on 3 continents standing casually on a sidewalk in Avalon, offering them a ride home like it was the most normal thing in the world. The silence stretched on, becoming increasingly awkward, until Arthur raised an eyebrow and looked at me with mild confusion. Did I interrupt something important? Chapter 534. Shadow 5. The silence that followed Arthur's casual introduction felt like it lasted forever, though it was probably only a few seconds. I watched my friends' faces cycle through various stages of shock, disbelief, and what could only be described as starstruck awe. Elena was the first to break. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice barely audible. You're actually Arthur Nightingale." "That would be me," Arthur replied with a small laugh, clearly finding their reactions amusing rather than concerning. "Though I'm just here to pick up my sister. Nothing too exciting." Marcus had managed to retrieve his dropped tablet, but his hands were shaking as he held it. We've been following your achievements and—" "The Imperial Palace duel," Elena suddenly burst out, her usual composure completely abandoned. "The bone armor technique. How did you manage to synchronize opposing magical paradigms without creating feedback loops?" Arthur blinked in surprise. "That's actually a really good question. You must be in advanced theoretical magic classes." "She is," I managed to say, finding my voice despite the surreal nature of watching my friends transform into fanboys and fangirls right in front of me. Lydia had finally recovered enough to speak, though her usual noble composure was noticeably strained. "Mr. Nightingale, I must say, your recent diplomatic achievements have been quite remarkable. The relationship dynamics alone must require extraordinary coordination skills." I felt my cheeks burn. Of course Lydia would bring up his romantic life. Arthur's expression shifted slightly, becoming more guarded. "I appreciate the interest, but I prefer to keep my personal relationships private." Of course," Lydia said quickly, clearly embarrassed by her own boldness. I didn't mean to pry. James, who had been silent this entire time, suddenly stepped forward with the determination of someone who had been building up courage. Would it be possible to get a photo? My father would never believe I met you without proof. Sure, Arthur agreed easily. Though I should warn you, I'm not exactly dressed for formal photos. Are you kidding? Marcus said, still looking dazed. You could be wearing a garbage bag and it would still be the most impressive photo I've ever taken. As my friends fumbled with their phones and attempted to arrange themselves for pictures, I found myself watching Arthur with a mixture of emotions I couldn't quite untangle. He was being patient, kind, genuinely interested in their questions about magical theory and academy life. He asked Elena about her family's tech merchant business, complimented Marcus on his insightful questions about combat theory, and even engaged Lydia in a brief discussion about noble family dynamics. With each interaction, he demonstrated the same natural charisma that had apparently conquered 3 princesses and countless others. And watching it happen in real time, seeing how easily he connected with people, how naturally he made them feel valued and heard, it hurt in ways I hadn't expected. Is it true that you're dating Princess Serafina Zenith? Elena asked, her curiosity overcoming her usual social filters. Arthur's smile became more diplomatic. Princess Serafina is a remarkable person, and I care about her deeply. But as I mentioned, I prefer not to discuss personal relationships in detail. What about the Order of the Crimson Dawn? James pressed. The ceremony is supposed to be next month, isn't it? Assuming I can coordinate the schedule with everything else, Arthur confirmed. Continental diplomacy involves a lot more paperwork than you might expect. They continued asking questions about his training regimen, his future plans, his thoughts on various magical theories. Arthur answered what he could, deflected what he couldn't, and somehow made each of them feel like their questions were genuinely important. I should have been proud. My brother was being everything he always was, kind, thoughtful, genuinely interested in other people. He was treating my friends with the same respect he would show to emperors or fellow heroes. Instead, I felt sick. All right, Arthur said finally, glancing at his phone. I hate to cut this short, but we should probably head home. Mom's expecting us for dinner, and she gets anxious when people are late. Of course, Elena said quickly. Thank you so much for talking with us. This has been incredible. It was nice meeting all of you, Arthur replied warmly. Aria's lucky to have such thoughtful friends. My friends began saying their goodbyes, each of them looking like they just experienced something life-changing. Elena hugged me tightly, whispering, "You are so lucky," in my ear. Marcus gave me a look that suggested I had somehow ascended to legendary status myself just by being related to Arthur. Lydia and James both shook my hand formally, as if I had suddenly become worthy of noble courtesy protocols. See you tomorrow, I managed to say, forcing a smile as they walked away, still talking excitedly among themselves. Arthur and I began walking toward where he'd parked his car, a sleek model that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries. Your friends seem nice, he said conversationally. Elena especially has a good grasp of magical theory. She should consider advanced research tracks. Yeah, she's really smart, I replied, though my voice sounded flat even to my own ears. Arthur glanced at me as he unlocked the car. Everything okay? You seem quiet. I slid into the passenger seat, surrounded by luxury that felt as natural to Arthur as breathing. The car's AI greeted us both by name, adjusting temperature and music preferences automatically based on our profiles. I'm fine, I lied, staring out the window as we pulled into Avalon's traffic. But I wasn't fine. I was drowning in a mixture of gratitude and resentment that made me hate myself more with each passing moment. Arthur had come to pick me up. He didn't have to. I could have taken public transport or called a ride service. He had chosen to spend his time, his incredibly valuable and important time, on something as mundane as giving his sister a ride home. That should have made me happy. It did make me happy, somewhere beneath all the other emotions churning in my chest. But watching him interact with my friends, seeing how easily he commanded their respect and admiration, witnessing firsthand the casual way he discussed continental politics and romantic relationships with royalty. It drove home just how vast the gap between us had become. Elena had called me lucky. They all thought I was lucky having Arthur as a brother. And they were right. I was incredibly fortunate to have someone who loved me, who worried about me, who would take time out of his legendary schedule to make sure I got home safely. So why did it hurt so much? The traffic moved slowly through the commercial district, giving me too much time to think. Arthur hummed quietly along with the music, occasionally pointing out new buildings or commenting on the city's development projects. Normal brother conversation, the kind I had always treasured. But now I couldn't stop thinking about the way my friends had looked at him. The reverence, the awe, the barely contained excitement at being in his presence. I thought about how naturally he had answered their questions, how easily he had made them feel important and valued. I thought about how I would never inspire that kind of reaction in anyone. The jealousy was like acid in my stomach, burning and impossible to ignore. I knew it was wrong, knew it was unfair to Arthur, who had never been anything but supportive and loving. He couldn't help being exceptional any more than I could help being ordinary. But knowing something was irrational didn't make it hurt less. Arya. Arthur's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts. Are you sure you're okay? You've been staring out that window for 10 minutes without saying anything. Just tired, I said, still not looking at him. Long day at the academy. I could feel him glancing at me, probably trying to decide whether to push the issue. Arthur had always been perceptive about other people's emotions. Another one of his many gifts. Did something happen today? With your friends or classes or? No, nothing happened. The words came out sharper than I intended. Everything's fine. Everything's always fine. The car fell silent except for the soft hum of the electric engine and the distant sounds of city traffic. I immediately regretted my tone, but I didn't know how to fix it without explaining feelings I couldn't even fully understand myself. How could I tell him that his kindness made me feel worse about myself? That his success highlighted my failures? That every achievement he earned felt like proof of everything I wasn't? How could I explain that I loved him and resented him in equal measure, and that the contradiction was tearing me apart? The rest of the drive passed in uncomfortable quiet. Arthur tried a few more times to start conversation, but I gave short answers and eventually he stopped trying. I could sense his confusion and concern, which only made the guilt heavier. By the time we pulled into our building's underground garage, I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of my own emotions. The contrast between Arthur's casual handling of his legendary status and my struggle with basic social situations seemed to embody everything wrong with my life. We rode the elevator to our floor in silence, the tension thick enough to cut. When we reached our penthouse, Arthur opened the door and held it for me. Another small kindness that somehow felt like a reminder of all the ways he was better than me. "We're home," Arthur called as we entered. Mom appeared from the kitchen almost immediately, her face brightening when she saw us. "How was your day, sweetie?" she asked me, then paused, clearly picking up on the atmosphere between Arthur and me. Her expression shifted into that particular parental awareness that suggested she had noticed something was wrong and was already formulating plans to address it. "Arya," she said after a moment, "could I talk to you for a minute? In private." Chapter 535, Shadow 6. The conversation with Arya had lasted nearly 2 hours, but it felt like minutes. Watching my daughter finally break down and admit her feelings, the jealousy, the inadequacy, the love mixed with resentment, had been both heartbreaking and relieving. I'd watched her pull away from family dinners, avoid Arthur's attempts at conversation, throw herself into social activities that kept her out of the house. I'd known something was wrong. A mother always knows. But hearing her sob against my shoulder, confessing how much it hurt to watch her friends worship her brother while she struggled to maintain mediocrity, had confirmed my worst fears. My brilliant, kind, determined daughter was drowning in the shadow of her extraordinary sibling. "I hate that I feel this way," she had whispered through her tears. "He's never been anything but loving and supportive. What kind of person am I?" "You're human," I had told her. stroking her hair the way I had when she was little. You're allowed to have complicated feelings. Love isn't always simple, especially when it comes to family. We talked through everything. Her academic struggles, the constant comparisons, the way Arthur's achievements made her own efforts feel meaningless. I'd listened, offered comfort where I could, and tried to help her understand that her worth wasn't determined by comparison to anyone else, even someone as exceptional as her brother. By the end of our conversation, some of the tension had left her shoulders. She'd agreed to stop avoiding family time, to give Arthur a chance to be just her brother rather than a living reminder of her limitations. He misses you, I had told her. All those attempts to spend time together, to help with your training, to just talk, he's been trying to connect with you. You're important to him. Really? She had asked, like a child seeking reassurance. Really? You're his little sister. That will always matter more to him than any title or achievement. Now, 3 weeks later, I could see the difference. Arya had kept her promise. She joined us for family dinners, participated in conversations, even asked Arthur for advice about her combat theory assignments. The easy camaraderie between my children was slowly returning, and our home felt whole again. This morning had been particularly wonderful. Arthur had helped Arya with a particularly difficult magical analysis problem over breakfast, explaining complex theoretical concepts with infinite patience. When she finally understood the solution, her face had lit up with genuine joy rather than the forced smiles I'd grown accustomed to seeing. "Thank you," she had said to Arthur, and meant it completely. "Anytime," he had replied, ruffling her hair in that way that used to annoy her but now made her laugh. Watching them together, seeing the love and trust restored between my children, filled me with the kind of deep contentment that made all the difficulties worthwhile. But contentment, I had learned over the years, was a fragile thing. Arthur was happy at home, more relaxed than I'd seen him in months, but I couldn't ignore the weight he carried, the responsibilities that pressed down on his shoulders like an invisible burden. At 18, he was managing relationships that had continental political implications. Then there were the relationships themselves. I liked the girls Arthur had chosen. Rachel's fierce determination, Seraphina's quiet intelligence, Cecilia's bold confidence, and Rose's gentle wisdom. Each of them brought something valuable to his life, and their genuine care for him was obvious whenever I saw them together. But managing for romantic relationships, especially ones with such far-reaching political consequences, couldn't be easy. He made it look effortless, but I was his mother. I saw the exhaustion he tried to hide, the careful planning that went into every decision, the weight of knowing that his personal choices affected the political stability of multiple continents. Sometimes I caught him staring out his bedroom window late at night, and I wondered what thoughts kept him awake. Was he happy with the path his life had taken? Did he ever regret the complexity that came with his extraordinary capabilities? My phone buzzed with a news alert, as it did several times daily now. Another article about Arthur. The media attention had become relentless, transforming my son from a private person into public property. I dismissed the notification without reading it. There would always be more articles, more speculation, more attempts to dissect and categorize every aspect of Arthur's life. I'd learned to ignore most of it, focusing instead on the young man who sat at our dinner table and worried about normal things like whether Arya was eating enough vegetables. The afternoon sun streamed through our penthouse windows, illuminating the comfortable spaces where my family had grown and changed over the years. In a few hours, Arthur would return from whatever important meeting he was attending today. Arya would come home from hanging out with her friends, and we'd gather for dinner like millions of other families around the world. But we weren't like other families, were we? We never had been, not really. Arya's jealousy, painful as it was to witness, made perfect sense when viewed in that context. How could she not feel inadequate when compared to someone whose very existence seemed to rewrite the rules of human potential? I couldn't blame her for those feelings. In truth, I sometimes wondered if I'd failed her by not preparing her better for the realities of having Arthur as a brother. Should I have done more to help her find her own path, her own sources of confidence and self-worth? But then I remembered the conversation we'd had 3 weeks ago, the way she'd finally opened up about her struggles, and I felt cautiously optimistic. Arya was stronger than she knew, more capable than she believed. She would find her way, just as Arthur had found his. My children were both extraordinary in their own ways. Arthur's gifts were obvious, blazing like a star that commanded attention from across the known world. Arya's strengths were quieter but no less real. Her compassion, her determination, her ability to see the humanity in people regardless of their status or achievements. They would both be fine. Different paths, different destinations, but both valuable and meaningful. I was proud of them, proud of the people they were becoming, proud of how they supported each other despite the challenges. Proud of the family we had built together, complex and imperfect but bound by genuine love. The peace of the afternoon wrapped around me like a comfortable blanket as I settled into my favorite chair with a cup of tea. Outside, Avalon hummed with its usual activity. Millions of people living their lives, pursuing their dreams, navigating their own complicated relationships and responsibilities. But inside our home, things were good, balanced, the way I had always hoped they would be. I took a sip of tea and allowed myself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Arya's jealousy toward Arthur had been painful to witness, but understandable given the circumstances. Any ordinary person might struggle with similar feelings when constantly compared to someone so exceptional. After all, Arthur truly was special. More special than even his closest friends and admirers realized. The thought brought a small smile to my lips as I watched the afternoon light play across our living room walls. He was special because I had designed him to be. Chapter 536. A Golden Birthday on. 2 months had passed in a blur since Cecilia's birthday, and now it was Rachel's turn to celebrate her coming of age. Rachel wasn't thrilled about her birthday itself. It was a date she had long dreaded, a painful reminder of her mother's abuse from years ago. But this year was different. This year she was excited, nervous even, not because of the ceremony or the inevitable string of formalities. No, Rachel was eagerly anticipating something far more personal, taking that next step with Arthur. She knew Cecilia had already shared that moment with him, and though it still stung a little, Rachel had come to terms with it. That decision had been made after much deliberation, and a fair amount of fighting among the 3 girls, while Arthur had been away on his year of isolation training. In the end, Cecilia's earlier birthday and the fact that she had fallen for Arthur first made her the natural choice. But now it was Rachel's turn. A flicker of worry crept into her thoughts as she considered her overprotective father and sister. They were obstacles she'd have to navigate carefully. Yet, Rachel pushed the anxiety aside. This was her moment, and she wasn't going to let anyone take it from her. She stepped into her expansive closet, a space more akin to a showroom than a wardrobe. Rows of elegant dresses, intricate gowns, and chic modern outfits lined the walls, each reflecting her impeccable taste. Rachel moved to a hidden section at the back, tapping a panel that slid open with a quiet hiss. She sifted through the carefully arranged garments, finally pulling out a specific outfit she had chosen just for tonight. Her cheeks warmed as she held it up, picturing herself wearing it. The thought brought a small smile to her lips. "He'll like this," she murmured to herself, nodding before carefully tucking the outfit back into place. Over the past 2 months, she'd seen Arthur every week, yet the anticipation of meeting him again never lessened. Each encounter felt fresh, charged with the same electricity as when they'd first started growing closer. This time, however, she would have him entirely to herself, and that thought filled her with a mix of excitement and determination. Rachel summoned her maids to help her prepare for the grand banquet. As the princess of the Creighton family, rulers of half the North, her coming-of-age ceremony was destined to be an affair of unmatched opulence. Every detail had to be perfect. For her dress, Rachel chose a resplendent gown of shimmering gold, its fabric catching the light like woven sunlight. It matched the radiant hue of her hair, creating an ethereal image that felt almost otherworldly. She completed the look with a delicate golden necklace and earrings, each piece adding to the aura of a living angel. Once satisfied with her appearance, Rachel reached for her phone and called Arthur, her voice steady yet tinged with anticipation as she asked him to escort her to the hall. Moments later, a knock came at her door, and Arthur stepped in. He was dressed in a tailored navy blue three-piece suit that hugged his frame perfectly. His longer black hair was tied neatly into a ponytail, a style that elevated his already striking presence. To Rachel, he looked effortlessly handsome, and the sight of him made her heart skip a beat. "Arthur," she greeted, a warm smile spreading across her lips as she felt her pulse quicken. "Ratch," he replied, his voice soft but steady, as he extended his arm toward her. She took it without hesitation, her fingers lightly resting on his, the simple gesture sending a quiet thrill through her. In that moment, Rachel felt like the center of the universe, and with Arthur by her side, she was ready to shine. Together, they stepped out, their figures striking a picture of elegance and grace as they made their way to the banquet hall. Soon enough, the duo encountered Alastair Creighton and Kathleen waiting for them in the corridor. The siblings stood side by side, a mirror image of one another with their silver hair and piercing blue eyes. Rachel, while sharing their striking blue gaze, inherited her golden hair from her mother, adding a unique brilliance to her appearance. Alastair's sharp eyes met Arthur's with genuine warmth, though a hint of amusement flickered in their depths. The relationship between the two had grown remarkably close over the years, built on mutual respect and shared experiences. "Arthur," Alastair greeted with a slight nod, his tone carrying the affection of someone who had come to regard the young man as family. "Your Majesty," Arthur replied respectfully, though there was an ease in his manner that spoke of their comfortable relationship. As they began walking toward the banquet hall, Arthur couldn't help but remember the rather unfortunate incident from a few months ago. The memory of Alastair walking in on him and Rachel in her bedroom, specifically the moment when Arthur had Rachel in handcuffs, still made him feel a mixture of embarrassment and awkwardness. Alastair had handled the situation with remarkable composure, all things considered. After the initial shock, he had simply cleared his throat, mentioned something about dinner being ready, and retreated with his dignity intact. But the memory of that particular father-meets-boyfriend moment would probably haunt Arthur for years to come. "I thought you might have something to say about tonight," Arthur murmured to Alastair, a hint of nervous humor in his voice. Alastair's lips twitched in what might have been suppressed laughter. "I've learned not to interrupt your private moments with my daughter," he replied dryly. "Once was quite enough." Rachel's face turned a spectacular shade of crimson. "Father," she protested, though her voice held more embarrassment than genuine anger. "What?" Alastair asked with mock innocence. "I'm simply acknowledging that you're both adults now, though perhaps next time you could remember to lock the door." Kathleen snorted with barely contained amusement, clearly enjoying her niece's mortification. Despite the teasing, Arthur could see the genuine acceptance in Alastair's eyes. The King of the North had always been fond of Arthur, recognizing his character and potential from their first meeting. That fondness had only deepened over time, especially after Alastair had spent a month training Arthur in advanced spellcasting techniques. During that intensive training period, Alastair had taught Arthur the secret Creighton technique, Laplace, which dramatically reduced spellcasting time. It was a mark of trust and respect that few outsiders had ever received. The fact that Arthur had mastered the technique so quickly had only increased Alastair's admiration. "Arthur," Alastair said, his tone becoming more serious as they approached the banquet hall. "Once you reach ascendant rank, I'll teach you the Astrius method." The offer was significant, another treasured secret of the Creighton family's magical techniques. Arthur understood the weight of such trust. "Thank you, Your Majesty," Arthur replied formally, though his gratitude was evident. Alastair paused in his stride, fixing Arthur with a meaningful look. "I think," he said slowly, "that given the circumstances and the nature of our relationship, you could call me something less formal." Arthur hesitated, understanding the implication but not quite daring to assume. "Uncle would be appropriate," Alastair continued with a slight smile. "At least for now." "Uncle," Arthur repeated, testing the word. It felt strange but right, acknowledging the family bond that had formed between them. "Uncle will do perfectly," Alastair confirmed, his smile becoming more genuine. "Though I suppose after you eventually marry my daughter, you'll have to upgrade to father." "Father!" Rachel exclaimed, though her protest was undermined by her brilliant smile and the happy flush in her cheeks. "What? It's inevitable," Alastor said with a chuckle. "Might as well acknowledge it now." As they continued toward the banquet hall, Arthur reflected on how much had changed. From the early days of careful formality to this moment of genuine family acceptance, his relationship with the Creighton family had evolved into something precious and meaningful. For Alastor, watching Arthur's growth from a promising young man into someone truly extraordinary had been remarkable. The incident in Rachel's bedroom, while awkward, had actually served to demonstrate how much Arthur cared for his daughter. The young man could have easily deflected blame or made excuses, but instead he had faced the situation with honesty and maturity. That moment had crystallized what Alastor already knew. Arthur wasn't just talented and powerful. He was genuinely devoted to Rachel's happiness and well-being. And that devotion, combined with his other qualities, made him exactly the kind of man Alastor wanted for his daughter. "You know," Alastor said as they reached the banquet hall doors, "I'm proud to call you family, Arthur, both for who you are and for how happy you make Rachel." The words carried weight that went beyond mere politeness. They represented acceptance, approval, and the kind of paternal blessing that Arthur had never expected to receive so readily. "Thank you, Uncle," Arthur replied, the title feeling more natural each time he used it. "That means more to me than you know." Rachel squeezed Arthur's arm, her eyes bright with happiness at seeing the two most important men in her life come together so naturally. Tonight was already shaping up to be everything she had hoped for, and they hadn't even entered the banquet hall yet. As the doors opened to reveal the splendor of her coming-of-age celebration, Rachel knew that this birthday would be remembered not just for the ceremony or the gifts, but for the moment when Arthur truly became part of her family in every way that mattered. Chapter 537. A Golden Birthday, 2. I felt a deep sense of relief at how quickly things had been resolved with Alastor. For mentors I had encountered on my journey stood out as pivotal figures in shaping my growth. Alastor Creighton, Lee Zenith, Charlotte Alaric, and Magnus Dracar. All of my mentors were important, but Alastor for more. He bet on my potential and even gave me the skull of the Archlich he slew in order to create my own Archlich. Alastor's offer was very important. Not only did it present an opportunity to mend and strengthen my bond with a man I deeply admired, but it also offered a path to elevate my spellcasting beyond its current limits. With the Astrius method in hand, I could address my stagnation and bring my magic closer to the level of my swordsmanship. It felt as though a long-closed door had opened, and I was eager to step through. "We can discuss this in greater detail after the celebration," Alastor promised, his voice warm yet composed. With those words, we finally arrived at the grand hall, its towering doors framed in ornate carvings of frost and starlight, a nod to the Creighton family's legacy. The hall itself was nothing short of breathtaking. Chandeliers of enchanted crystal hung above, casting a soft, ethereal glow that danced across the polished marble floors. Streams of silver and gold fabric adorned the walls, their shimmering folds resembling cascading light. Guests dressed in their finest attire milled about, laughter and conversation weaving a vibrant tapestry of sound. Rachel, ever the radiant host, took a moment to adjust her golden gown before stepping through the threshold, her confidence like a beacon drawing every eye. I followed close behind, feeling the weight of countless gazes as they shifted to me. It was impossible to ignore the subtle murmurs, some curious, some skeptical. After all, I wasn't just her escort. I was Arthur Nightingale, a name that now carried its own weight. "Look at them," Rachel whispered with a mischievous grin, her voice low enough for only me to hear. "All these nobles, pretending they don't care, but they're dying to know what makes you so special." "Maybe I'll let them figure it out themselves," I replied, matching her tone, earning a soft laugh that only made her shine brighter. We made our way further into the hall, Rachel nodding gracefully to the many well-wishers who approached. Some offered polite greetings, others more effusive praise, but Rachel navigated it all with a practiced ease that spoke volumes about her upbringing. As for me, I stayed quiet, content to observe. This was her night, after all. Soon, we were greeted by Serafina, Rose, and Cecilia, who stood near the grand staircase. Serafina wore a flowing, pale blue dress that mirrored the serene composure in her crystalline gaze. She looked every bit the picture of calm, though I noticed the faintest glint of amusement as her eyes flicked between Rachel and me. Rose stood beside her in an elegant emerald gown that complemented her brown eyes beautifully. Her gentle smile radiated warmth, and there was something quietly regal about her presence that spoke to her noble upbringing. Cecilia wore a dress similar to what she had worn for her birthday banquet, but this design was more conservative, lacking the dramatic backless cut of her previous gown. The deep crimson fabric still managed to capture her fiery personality perfectly. "I see you've brought him intact," Serafina said lightly, her voice carrying just enough humor to draw a smile from Rachel. "Of course," Rachel replied, taking Serafina's hand briefly in greeting. "Arthur's surprisingly resilient, though he could do with a little more charm." "I'll take that as a compliment," I said dryly, earning a quiet chuckle from both Serafina and Rose. The five of us stood together for a moment, the weight of the celebration briefly lifting in the shared camaraderie. But the evening was just beginning, and soon enough, the first strains of music filled the air. "It's time for the first dance," Rachel said, her eyes sparkling with anticipation as she turned to me. "Shall we?" I offered my hand, and she took it without hesitation. As we moved to the center of the hall, the crowd parted to make way, their attention fully fixed on us. The orchestra swelled, and with the first note we began to dance. Rachel moved with the grace of someone who had spent years mastering the art, her every step light and precise. For my part, I focused on matching her rhythm, though it was hard not to notice the way her golden hair shimmered under the lights, or the way her smile softened as she looked up at me. "You're not so bad at this," she said teasingly, her voice low enough to keep our exchange private. "High praise," I replied with a grin, "though I think you're carrying the team here. Someone has to," she shot back, though there was no real bite to her words. The dance continued, the two of us gliding effortlessly across the floor. Around us, the world seemed to blur, the music and the crowd fading into the background. For that moment, it felt as though it was just the two of us, moving in perfect harmony. As the final notes of the orchestra's melody faded, the applause of the gathered nobles filled the hall. Rachel and I parted with a graceful bow to each other, and she whispered, "Don't keep Serafina waiting too long." I glanced toward where Serafina stood, her crystalline blue eyes meeting mine with quiet anticipation. She stepped forward with her characteristic grace, offering a small, serene smile. "May I have this dance?" she asked, her voice calm and melodious. "Of course," I said, offering her my hand. The orchestra struck up a new melody, this one more contemplative and elegant. Dancing with Serafina was like moving through a gentle dream. Every step was measured, purposeful, filled with quiet grace. Where Rachel had been vibrant energy, Serafina was serene confidence. "You look thoughtful tonight," she observed as we moved through a gentle turn. "Just appreciating the moment," I replied honestly. "It's not often we get to simply enjoy each other's company without worrying about continental politics or magical threats." Her smile deepened slightly. "Indeed, though I suspect such peaceful moments will become increasingly rare as time goes on. Then we should treasure them while we can," I said, spinning her gracefully. "Wise words," she murmured, her eyes holding mine as we came together again. "I intend to do exactly that." As our dance concluded, Rose stepped forward, her brown eyes bright with anticipation. She wore her gentle smile like a crown, radiating the kind of warmth that made everyone around her feel valued and appreciated. "My turn?" she asked softly, extending her hand. "Always," I replied, taking her hand in mine. Dancing with Rose was like finding a moment of perfect peace in the midst of chaos. Her movements were refined but natural, lacking the intense precision of royal training but filled with genuine joy. She laughed softly at something I said, the sound like music itself. "You seem more relaxed tonight," she observed as we moved through the steps. "Good company has that effect," I said, earning a pleased blush from her. "Flatterer," she accused gently, though her smile suggested she didn't mind in the least. "Only when it's true," I replied, drawing her closer as the music swelled. Rose's eyes sparkled with happiness, and for a moment, the weight of expectations and responsibilities fell away, leaving just two people enjoying a perfect dance. As the music faded and Rose curtsied gracefully, I caught sight of Cecilia waiting at the edge of the dance floor. She had been watching the entire evening unfold, her crimson eyes gleaming with playful intensity. Clad in her elegant gown, Cecilia looked every inch the fiery princess she was, her golden hair catching the light like captured flames. "You saved the best for last, I hope?" Cecilia said as I approached, her voice carrying that familiar note of playful challenge. "Always," I replied, offering her my hand with a slight bow. Her smirk widened as she placed her hand in mine. "Good answer." The orchestra struck up a final melody for the evening, this one bold and spirited, perfectly suited to Cecilia's personality. Dancing with her was like trying to keep up with a controlled wildfire. Her movements were confident and daring, each step carrying a spark of her indomitable spirit. "You know," she said as we spun across the floor, "I've been watching you dance with the others all evening." "And?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "And I think you saved your best performance for me," she said with satisfaction, leaning closer as we moved through a complex sequence. "Confident, aren't we?" I teased. "Always," she replied without hesitation. "It's one of my most charming qualities." I laughed, unable to argue with her logic. Among many others, her expression softened for just a moment, the playful mask slipping to reveal something deeper. "You mean that?" "Every word," I said sincerely. As the final notes of music filled the hall, Cecilia and I came to a stop in the center of the floor. The applause was thunderous, but all I could focus on was the way she smiled at me. Genuine, warm, and completely without pretense. "Thank you," she said quietly, just for me to hear. "For this dance, for this evening, for everything." "Thank you," I replied, "for being exactly who you are." As the evening continued around us, with conversations resuming and new dances beginning, I felt a deep sense of contentment. Here, surrounded by the people I cared about most, I could almost forget about the weight of destiny and responsibility that usually pressed down on my shoulders. Tonight was about celebration, about love, about the bonds that connected us all. And in that moment, that felt like more than enough.